they took a skull that they found of Homo erectus, Kinnis and Kinnis, the name right there, took a skull that they found of Homo erectus, and this is their recreation of that skull. It's about 1 million years old. So this one itself would not be the oldest. And we we do see that Homo erectus goes back like 2 million years, though, right? So uh, they do go back like 2 million years, and they are kind of like the first of us. Homo habilis predates them by roughly, I think, 1 million years. And Homo habilis is the first Homo sapiens, so the first human, or not Homo sapien, Homo species. And so they are the first humans, and they're like 3 million years old. And I'm not sure if we're kind of rearranging that thought process. We may change the way that we term Homo habilis just because of some of the new information that's come out that shows that Homo habilis isn't the first one to create tools, right? And the reason that we named them Homo habilis is because we believed that Homo habilis, handyman is what Homo habilis means, was the first to create stone tools. And so now that we know that Paranthropus boisei is the first to create stone tools, we might, see that there's some renaming going on or some shifting of the way that we understand Homo habilis. Technically, though, Homo habilis is the first human species out there currently. And oh, fuck off. Can't fucking do this sometimes. And Homo habilis being the first human species out there, they are their level of skill is pretty high for understanding, right? Our current knowledge, though, is that Homo habilis actually did not create the Oldowan tool complex, that it would have been Paranthropus boisei. Thank you, love. And they would just be adapting and not changing, but adapting their abilities to the usage of that tool. There's also some current idea that Homo habilis or that Homo erectus comes out of a combination of Homo habilis and Paranthropus boisei and Australopithecine, which is Lucy. And so if that proves to be true as they start looking through it, right? If that proves to be the reality, then what we're looking at is a convergence of species, making all of those three species the ancestors of Homo erectus, and therefore our ancestors, because Homo erectus is pretty much our ancestor, right? Most of us have Neanderthal genes. There's actually only 2 communities on the planet that don't have Neanderthal genes, and those 2 communities are both in Africa. One is the Kwe population of South Africa, and then the other one is the Yoruba population of West Africa, right? I do have to do a little bit of filing of my nails, so if that's something that bothers people, I apologize, but I'm trying to make sure that I'm doing a few things. It helps me focus if I'm doing more than one thing while I'm doing this. And so this is one of those things that I need to do, so that's one of those things that we're going to do. So we're not able to breed with other hominids. Hello, beautiful. We're able to breed with other humans is how I would pronounce it, Atira, because there's other hominins out there. So hominids, let me look at the taxon and make sure where that is. But I think hominids includes the apes, right? And so I think that what it is the fact that we're not really so much able, anything underneath the great apes is a hominid. So that might be why people are having a hard time with that. But if we talk about it in terms of these other human species that were living along the same time frame, right? That makes it a little bit easier for people. Thank you so much. That makes it a little bit easier for people to comprehend it, right? And that's what we are dealing with is other humans, because literally we couldn't mix with things that we don't consider homo. So unless we consider them to be human, they're not people that we actually were mixing with, right? So if you're phrasing it as other hominids, it might be something that people have a hard time understanding because of the fact that there are other hominids alive today, and we're like, well, I'm not breeding with a chimpanzee, right? So that might be the part of it, but yes. So Neanderthals and Denisovans, though, are considered other humans. And so I would use other species or other humans, so it makes it easier. Remember, we've talked before in other lives about, trying to make it comprehensible for people and trying to put things on, like if you're dealing with somebody who's alt-right, you might want to put things on a scale that they can understand so that they might be able to hear you, because sometimes people can't hear unless it's a scale that they can understand, right? So if we talk about it more as other humans than other hominids, then they might understand it more as looking at other species of humans rather than trying to think of the great apes and stuff like that, right? Just because, right? And I mean, we do all fall underneath the hominid thing, but when we look at the taxon, the hominid is up here. It's not, so we're sapien, and then there's homo, and then there's homini. Let me see, let me double check what the fucking, because it goes so weird, like uh, taxon. I want to pull up the taxon so I can see it. So when I'm explaining it, I actually like understand what or like I have a visual of what I'm explaining. So it makes it easier for people to understand, right? So, um, so hominoidae is the very top of them, right underneath animal. Because so the domain is Eurykatoa, and the kingdom is Animalia, and then the phylum is Chordata, and then the class is Mammalia, which is where we start to understand what we're talking about, right? And then the order is Primate, right? And then the suborder is Simiforms, and then the family is Hominidae, hom, Hominidea. And then when we look at that, that's one that encompasses all of the great apes, right? And then when we get down to subfamily, we go to Hominidea, and that is like 3 or 4 above species. So it goes Hominidea, uh, hominea, hominini, than homo. So we would be able to breed with other homo. We would be able to breed with maybe other hominii, because there is evidence that early on, as the line diverges, that we're breeding back with the chimpanzee line, right? So there is some evidence of that. So maybe 3 million years ago, we're still able to breed with other hominini. And then once that passes, we get to the point that we are breeding with just other humans. So anything that is underneath the classification Homo, which is all the other species that we intermix with, like Neanderthal and like Denisovan, is going to be another human, another Homo species. And so all the ones that we actually intermix with as Homo sapiens, right, are all Homo. All the species that we are currently thinking actually become a part of or intermix to become us. Like we've talked a bit before about how there's several subspecies of Homo erectus by certain anthropological groups. They consider them subspecies. That would be Heidelbergensis, Ergaster, Antecessor, and things like that are considered subspecies of erectus, right? These are all Homo, right? So they're all human. And then it is those species that evolve into us and that evolve into Neanderthal and Denisovan. So if we're looking at that, when we are mixing, even in our species start, it's a bunch of humans mixing to create us, and then it is a bunch of us, it's us mixing with other humans to get where we're at today, right? So Neanderthals are not part of sapien. There's a new article out where they're looking at that. Like they think that maybe Neanderthal is just a different looking sapien. But the study is very new and they haven't really gone into depth. So I really don't know about it, right? I really don't know exactly where we're at with it. And I'm not going with the fact that they are another group of sapien until I've seen some more evidence, because I do know that their DNA is so distinct, right? So I just, there is some thought process as we're going into it now that might be the truth, but we're not there with a full understanding yet, right? So I just think, until we're there with a full understanding, or I understand it more personally, In what evolution do we get blue lips? I'm a fairy. I'm not a human. You're human. I'm not. We get the blue lips in the evolution of technology, right? Um, so when we are looking at other Homo species that we bred with, they would all be other humans, right? Fairy Liberation Front, right? I got told I could be a fairy for a year if I wanted to, and I I like to paint myself odd colors and dress up with wings and ears and go out in public because being a human sucks ass. And then I have a selkie costume, right? Like, and actually, I'm going to be working more on costuming this year and creating more costumes for myself, so that I can actually like human less. Humaning sucks sometimes, right? Most of us just, right, right, right. Well, and I think that we, have my own opinions on that. I think that I'll just be a fairy forever. But I settled on a year just to make sure that I could. And then I'm going to actually, I'm getting a lot healthier. And so I'm hoping within this year, I'm going to start sewing again. And so I'm going to start being able to make costumes. That's awesome, Kara. I have a green one and a black one as well, and I love them, and a yellow one, though I don't like the yellow one so much. I'm going as a demon for Halloween, so I have like a red metallic that I'm gonna paint that I'm gonna spray my body with, and I've got an airbrush. I'm gonna airbrush my body with red metallic paint, and uh, that's why I have the really long nails is because I'm doing the demon thing. But I'm just like anytime I can be anything else. I've got the black lipstick. I'm going to put the black lipstick on with the red metallic for the demon, and I've got horns, and I got this beautiful long black wig. I can't wait to wear. I've actually worn it around the house a couple of times. I almost put it on today so everybody could see. So I'll probably wear it in a live at some point. I'm like, I just need to shave my head and start wearing wigs. But when we're looking at the prior humans, or other humans that lived alongside us, they are definitely all human. And so it just is easier for people's understanding if we just use the term human most of the time. Um, But today I kind of wanted to talk a little bit more about Homo erectus. I mean, we've had this conversation in here. I will. Well, and I did last year where if you go back through to like October of last year, I go to a rave every year for Halloween since 2000. My first rave was in 2021 for Halloween, and my sister took me. And so that's what I'm doing this year is we're going to another rave for Halloween. And so I always post. Last year I went as Hera and I painted my entire body gold. And so there's actually a video on here where I posted the look and everything else so that you can actually like take a look at my hairstyle. But I will definitely be posting my demon. My partner is also going as a demon and he looks fan fucking tastic. It's going to look really hot. I can't wait. Um, so super, super excited. I'm very much into, well, I love Samhain, but I don't like I'm not everybody's like, oh, it's a spooky season. It's like it's not the spooky season, it's the harvest season, it's a season of abundance, it's the season of wealth, it's the season of having much, it's the season of feasting, right? It's a season of celebration before you go into the long winter, right? Where you're going to starve for part of it, right? So it's not the spooky season; it's a season of abundance, right? So I love Samhain, and I really love to participate in Samhain. But for me, Samhain is the only part of the season that has any like Halloweeny thing to it. The rest of it is just harvest. Um, I do fully believe, and it should always be said as we're coming up, right? That we are actually it was because they kept tipping over her outhouse. Trick or treat was absolutely created by a religious spinster in the Midwest because they kept tipping over her outhouse on Halloween. So she created trick or treat in their town so they would stop, yeah, destroying her gardens, turning over her outhouse. And so because of that, that's how we got the trick or treating element of Halloween, right? But Samhain and the original is about the fact that the veil is thin. It's the changing of the year. And most Celtic thought process believes that the in between times are power times, right? Dawn and dusk, midnight and noon, the longest and the shortest day, the space of the sea, things like that. These are in between times, right? And so Samhain is kind of a New Year's. It's an in between as you're shifting from the abundance of the world to the death, right? The winter, winter is death, right? If you look at the cycle of the year, you see birth and rebirth within spring, and it cycles through into death and winter. So when you're looking at Samhain is one of those celebrations that is about cycling. It's a between point, and because it's a between point, the veil is extremely thin, and the veil being extremely thin means that the ancestors are going to come and walk the world, right, and roam the world. And if the ancestors find you, if your ancestors find you, they love you and they want to take you back with them, and so they'll steal you, and take you over. And that's why we dress up, because you don't want your ancestors to find you. If you can prevent your ancestors from finding you on Samhain, then they can't steal you and take you over, because they can only take their own people. They can only take their own descendants over. And since they can't steal you and take you over if they can't find you, we started dressing up. Your ancestors couldn't find you, right? If you got to go outside on Samhain, you dress up. Um, so with that, you see a lot of people who claim to be Wiccan who are dressing up as witches, and it's like you can't dress as yourself. You're not supposed to dress as yourself. You're supposed to dress as something completely and utterly different. Because if you dress as yourself, then your ancestors are going to see and find you, right? Your ancestors are going to take you to the other side. The other thing that I always like to remind people with Halloween is that you should not be costuming as a culture, right? So don't be wearing a cultural costume, especially not cultural costumes. I'm sorry, I'm also doing my nails. I've got to file out my nails a little bit. And we were talking earlier, it helps me focus if I'm doing more than one thing. So the cultural costumes are extremely important. In a, okay, Miami, how about you don't tell people what to do, because you're telling me what to do. So the cultural costumes you shouldn't be dressing in, because of the fact that when you're looking at cultural costumes and you become somebody else's culture as a costume, it's rude, right? It's extremely disrespectful, and it can also cause a lot of harm, right? Because we get a lot of harmful stereotypes out of that, right? So that's why it's really important at this time of year not to dress in cultural costumes, right? So don't dress as somebody else's culture as a costume. And I always like to make sure that we talk about that at this time of the year. We're going into Samhain, and people are going to be dressing up. Do not wear that Native American costume. Do not wear that India costume. Do not wear a costume that makes you an entirely different culture. Right. Um, and so with that, those are the two things as we're going into Samhain, because we were just talking about my costumes for Samhain, that I really find important as you go into Samhain. Dressing like yourself does not mean that you can't celebrate and dress like something that you can't celebrate traditionally and dress like something that you're not, or that you are, right? So if you are celebrating traditionally, you should not wear a costume that is totally you, right? Don't dress as a witch if you're a witch, right? And then it's really important that as we're entering into this, that we remember that respect for other people is really huge, and that it is disrespectful to use somebody else's culture as a costume for Halloween. So please don't be doing that, right? Well, Mike, I mean, you can just go do your own thing, right? Um, I mean, I'm not going to say you're going to be safe on the streets. Um, hold on just one second. I need to send somebody a text. Uh, Sorry, I know that paused me. I just had to, somebody was trying to call me, and I need to let them know that I couldn't talk now. Um, so as you are looking at what to do for Halloween, those are just kind of some important things to focus on, to notice, to understand. I might have to go change my shirt. Actually, it's getting kind of hot in here, and I've got a sweatshirt on. Um, so uh, when we're looking at that going forward for Halloween, those are important focal points. But that's not today's conversation, right? We're not here to talk about Halloween. What we're here to talk about today is Homo erectus and some of the prior species that lived before us, and some of those interactions that we see in the archaeological record, and some of those interactions that we know of because of our own DNA, right? And so when we're looking at paleoanthropology, we're looking at things that are prehistory and usually pre 10,000 years ago, maybe even further back, depending on what you study in paleoanthropology. If what you're studying in paleoanthropology is early Homo sapiens, and maybe you're looking up to 10,000 years ago. But if what you're studying in paleoanthropology is, Neanderthal or Denisovan, then that might be pushed further back, right? So, when we're looking at paleoanthropology and we're looking at the different species that lived alongside us, this becomes really important, or before us, this becomes really important in our self understanding and our understanding of self, which is why I like to talk about them because we seem to have this understanding of ourselves that's pretty off from what the biological drive is for us and pretty off from what the actual like needs for sapiens is, right? Like we have this understanding that we're violent, and there's no evidence that we're violent before 10,000 years ago, really. And we have this understanding that, we seem to think that people were going around to caves and hitting women over the head and stealing them, and that's just not what's happening, right? There's not the ideas that we have. We seem to think that this is a violent and turbulent time with no safety in it, and we are not looking at a violent and turbulent time with no safety in it, right? We are looking at a time that has a lot of health and a lot of connection to the world, that still, is very animistic in its thought processes and is actually pretty healthy in the way that it interacts with each other and the land. Many of you might have seen, like there was a wood building that they found in Africa that's 500,000 years old. That's Homo heidelbergensis. Like last week, the week before, like it was really, really recent, and it's 500,000 years old in Africa. And again, this being Homo heidelbergensis, this is a species that predates us, right? And this species predating us, having actual wooden structures, really tells us a lot about the fact that we were really a lot more advanced further back than we like to think. Now, this isn't that ancient alien stuff, and it isn't the, uh, um, Atlantis kind of theory, right? That's not what we're talking about. So, when we're looking at these things, it's important to understand that we were always more advanced than we like to think that we were advanced. And it's important to understand that these things don't mean the things that most people want to make it out to mean, right? So, being more technologically advanced as a species than we like to think that we are doesn't mean that we were all in spaceships, right? It doesn't mean that there was an entire continent that sunk beneath the waves, and when it sunk between the waves, sunk beneath the waves, it spread out and gave its technological advancements to a world that didn't have technological advancements, right? That's not how this works. How it does work, though, is the fact that uh, we we think of eternity. We think that what we're building is eternal, right? We think that the big cities that we're building are going to be eternal. We think that in a million years, somebody's going to stumble across our concrete and see it and know that we were here. But the fact of the matter is in a million years, that shit all degrades. That shit's not there anymore, right? So when we're looking at our understanding of our own eternity, those are things that kind of need to be understood, because way too many people have this understanding of our eternity as this idea that um, we were never advanced before, and that we are just now reaching a space that we even have comprehension, right? Like that we're just now reaching a space where we have these comprehensive ideas. And this just isn't factual. Like our level of comprehension isn't new, right? Farming in cities are absolutely the Caucasian legacy. I would have to specify that by farming, we're talking about Western agriculture, which is a monocrop agriculture, because there is agriculture across the world, right? And agriculture across the world isn't always monocrop culture, and many times it's very healthy agriculture as compared to what we're dealing with, right? And because of that, I always want to specify that there are different forms of agriculture. Give me 2 minutes. I've got to change my shirt before I sweat out here. I apologize. Menopause means that I'm getting hot all the fucking time. So when we're looking at that and looking at that understanding, we can absolutely see that we are not the so we're advanced on a lot of levels, but there's a lot of levels that we're not advanced on. There's a lot of levels that are kind of backwards evolution of thought, right? Thank you. Yeah, he's pissed because I won't let him in our bedroom anymore because I have 3 long hairs and the cat hair drives me insane. And this is his office as far as he's concerned, and I am sitting in his chair as far as he's concerned. And thank you. My back wall is actually have my sister that is an MMIW victim is up there, and then I have this. There's like a white umbrella, and that's what I used in Portland in 2020, and it had painted stuff on it. I only got to use it once, and the cops ripped it off of me and ripped it apart. But I had painted it, and so I've got little girls up there in red dresses, and then I've got an MMIW, and it say their names, and then non-violent warrior goddess with a constitutional obligation, which was the sign that I carried for quite some time. And then it's just got a few other things. Boudica is back there, and Grace O'Malley is back there, and Matahari is back there, and Luzon is back there. And then I've got pictures of my babies back there because it's just an everything wall, right? So when we're looking at this and we understand that older humans actually have this advanced society that we probably won't perceive it as advanced because it's not advanced the way that we're advanced, but the advancement is a lot closer to nature, and that advancement being closer to nature, it's a lot healthier, right? So when we're looking at that, it's important to understand, right, that this isn't the be all and end all, right? That we're not as great as we kind of think we are, right? And that we can be advanced and still be in connection with the earth, right? Oh, thank you, Maeve. Yeah, she's amazing. She was one of my favorites. And it actually, like, she's been a hero since I was young. Granny O'Malley, or Granny O'Malley, and she's been a favorite since I was younger. So when we're looking at that understanding that we're more advanced before is important, because when we're looking at how we can reconnect to the earth and still maintain the advancements that we have, that's very important, right? I personally feel that reconnection to the earth and that ability to connect to the earth that we see in us prior to 10,000 years ago, and that we see in other species of humans is in other animals, is really it suits us better. Like, we get more of our needs met in that kind of a space than we get our needs met today. Our needs aren't really being met today. And most people in society are aware that our needs are not being met today, right? The idea that you have a right to life, but you don't have a right to anything that involves that right to life. Like, you have a right to life, but not to eat. You have a right to life, but not to water. You have a right to life, but not to a safe and stable home, right? All things that we need for life, right? And we had all of those things at one point. And then, we allowed narcissistic god kings and greed and exploitation and the idea that you could own land and the idea that you can own other people to enter into our scheme. And people before us didn't have those ideas. People before us didn't have the idea of greed, and didn't have the idea of, how much can I exploit out of other people, or can I own land? Can I own animals? Can I own things that actually have their own breathing soul, that are actually alive, right? And so when we get to that understanding, if we can use that understanding along with the current technologies and understandings that we have, I'm sorry, PB, or PJ, I am almost done. And then I won't be doing any more filing, but I do need to, I'm trying to finish them up. And so I have to do this really quick. I'm actually on the last part of it, and then I will stop filing. I apologize. I do know that for some, it is a neurodivergent thing. And I do know for some that it can be hard, and I apologize for that. There are times that I talk that we don't do this. This is not the normal. It's just I have stuff I've got to do today. And I really wanted to get into a live because I haven't been in a live all week long because, like I was saying earlier, I had somebody staying with me and they were great about clearing out my office so that I could actually come in here and get in a live. But when I've got other people around and other activity, it becomes hard for me to function and focus. So when we're looking at the different things that we see in humans prior to us, we can see, and we see this, like if you're watching the news at all when it comes to paleoanthropology, and if you're watching the news at all as it's coming across mainstream stuff, we're seeing that the Neanderthals are actually way more advanced than we like to think of for a long time, right? And that's why they're saying that they think that they might just be, they've always been another human because they're homo, right? But a lot of people like to not equate those as the same thing, right? And so that's a part of the reason why they're now stating that they think Neanderthal is just another human that just kind of looks different, right? And when we're looking at then we can see that there's a lot of activity and action that is so healthy and so advanced, right? So for 600,000 years, which is 300,000 more years than we've been on the planet, this species of human was living in homes, probably building some. If we've got 500,000-year-old buildings that we've found by Homo habilis, it's very likely that their descendants, Homo neanderthalis, actually had wooden structures, right? If I have a wooden structure, my children are more likely to have wooden structures. So we see that Neanderthals actually built ovens, and they actually, in building ovens, like they were kind of foodies. Like they had different foods that they really liked. They would actually do things like make food from leftovers. There's evidence of flatbread in Neanderthals. And this is, just cooking stuff, right? Like this is just the basics. But when we're looking at this, we can actually see that there's a lot more advancements within Neanderthals, within other prior human species than we've believed for the last, as long as we've known, right? Like we haven't believed that there was any advancements. We spent this whole time going, well, Neanderthals aren't smart. And now we're like, oh, well, maybe Neanderthals were smart, right? We spent this entire time wanting these other groups of humans to somehow be less than us, to somehow explain how we're still here and they're not. But the fact of the matter is, they were here longer than we've been. When we look at Homo denisovan, we see a species that was 400 years on the planet, and they were 100,000 years, 400,000, and they were 100,000 years on the planet before we came along, right? So when we're looking at these prior species, we can see that within these prior species, they actually are, it's not that we outlived them, it's that they outlived us and it's our time now, right? That they went through their period of time and they lived longer than we have been alive in that period of time, but their period of time ended. Their cycle of time ended. We don't like to think of the fact that we actually belong to the same cycle of life as everything else, right? Like we die too, right? And species come and go. Species extinct naturally. Species die off naturally. And that's something that's happened to a lot of Homo species, a lot of other humans. Something that happened to Homo erectus. Homo erectus was 2 million years on this planet, and then they passed on. And they passed on after they passed on their genes, after they, are able to create other species and kind of advance in other species, right? And yet their species as a whole passes on because its time is done. It's outlived its time. When we start outliving our time, we leave. And that's something that needs to be done, right? It is Nana. This is great, great, great Nana. I always think of this picture as very feminine, though we don't have the slightest clue whether or not this skull was male or female. But I always picture her as grandma. Something about this face actually makes me think grandma rather than grandpa, right? There's something about this face that I'm like, oh, that's totally a woman. So it's important in that understanding to really grasp that, to really see that, yeah, like there is this entirety of our time on this planet that was lived by people before we came along, right? That we are important in the scheme of things, that other things were important in the scheme of things too. And for us, that's really hard, right? For us, the idea that something else could have been just as important as us, like, comes across very frequently as fuck that shit. We're the shit, right? We're the shit. Nobody else can be the shit. It's only us that's the shit, right? The fact of the matter is, though, is that there are other species that were the shit, right? There are other species that did a hell of a lot of shit, right? So when we're looking at species like Homo erectus, we are looking at a species who did a whole bunch of other shit. We know that Homo erectus is leaving Africa at 1.9 million years ago. There was that huge thing about a tooth in Georgia, the country, not the state, at 1.9 million years ago. Last year, like, oh my God, we found a tooth in Georgia that's 1.9 million years old. It's a human tooth, and it is a human tooth because Homo erectus is absolutely human. So this human tooth that we're finding in Georgia at 1.9 million years ago is Homo erectus making it outside of Africa at 1.9 million years ago. And as Homo erectus makes it outside of Africa at 1.9 million years ago, Homo erectus really starts spreading across the planet. As Homo erectus is spreading across the planet, we see that Homo erectus is taking their knowledge with them into these new spaces. And the knowledge that Homo erectus takes with them into these new spaces is highly important. The knowledge that Homo erectus takes with them into these new spaces includes the usage of fire. This knowledge includes the usage of clothing, and includes the usage of augmented stone tools. And what do I mean by augmented stone tools? So we now know that it was not Homo habilis that creates the first stone tool, that it's Paranthropus boisei, as I was just stating. The first to actually manipulate stone tools into something else is Homo erectus. So Paranthropus boisei creates the stone tools, but nobody really like changes those stone tools, and they're very basic. So Oldowan tool complexes include a blade, a flake that can be used for cutting, and they include hammerstones and cobblestones. And hammerstones and cobblestones, a cobblestone sits on the ground and it's kind of a flat rock, and you put something on top of it and you use another semi-flat bottom rock to smash. This is your hammerstone and cobblestone combination. And this is what we use to crack open bone to get marrow out, or crack up bone to get tools usage out, like, because you're not going to sew or use a stone awl, right? You're going to have to use a bone tool for things like that. And since you're not going to be able to use a stone awl, or you're not going to be able to actually like work with you're not going to be able to actually like do a whole lot with a stone tool, and you need a bone tool. The usage of bone tools is something that's pretty far back, and it's also something that we see only happens when we have the ability to kind of crack apart the bone and therefore utilize it, right? So we do see that Paranthropus boisei is using these tools, and we do see that Homo habilis is using these tools, and these very basic tools. But when Homo erectus comes along, we see that Homo erectus takes these very basic tools and changes them. And how they take these very basic tools and change them is pretty basic to start with, and then it kind of morphs a bit as they go along. So first we see that they take these very basic tools and change them utilizing what we call the Acheulean hand axe assemblage. And the Acheulean hand axe assemblage is they basically make something that looks like a teardrop, and you can use as kind of like an axe. So you can chop things a little bit more, which you can't really do with the stone tools that there are previous to this, right? And so that you can chop things a little bit more, these hand axes, they're roughly teardrop shaped, with kind of like the point being the sharp point, and then you have a place where you can hold it that's kind of the back part of the teardrop. And that space is able to provide you with a place to hold this as you're utilizing it. And this can be used for many different things that you could not use other stone tools for, right? So you're looking at a stone tool that can be used to chop wood. and a stone tool that can be used to break things apart more. You're not going to look at the stone tool as something from Java. I think this is Java Man. I can't remember exactly if this is Java Man or not. Let me look up and see. Um, you're not going to be using these stone tools as something that you're going to be killing with. Like it's not something that you're going to be hunting with. It's something that you're going to actually be utilizing after the hunt is over, right? Um, there are other things that we are able to, let me see. This is a Kinnis and Kinnis image, and that can be found. I have Kinnis and Kinnis's website on my website, my widdaord.com website. And so I can, let me see if I can open this in a new tab so that I can get to it. It's not going to work like that. Okay. I just want to make sure that I remember whether or not this was actually Java or not. Because I do believe this is Java Man. We've talked about them before, but I can't remember. Trying to type with these nails really sucks. Like I can do these nails for like 3 days. And I want to do them early enough that I can actually get to. If you haven't been to Kinnis and Kinnis's page, I really recommend Kinnis and Kinnis's page because there's a lot of really cool different images of prior humans on Kinnis and Kinnis's page. This one is Homo erectus pithecanthus, and this one I believe comes from Java. I can't find it. I know that it's somewhere on that website that'll actually tell you, but I can't find it right now. But Kinnis and Kinnis has a bunch of beautiful images, and they will actually tell you on there where everything is from. Let me see. Oh, this is it. Okay. And it just says Pithecanthropus. Ed used to actually say where she was from. I just can't remember now what it used to say, and it doesn't look like it actually says it anymore. But this is Homo erectus, and this one is this one is 1 million years old. I do remember that. Again, I can't find the actual like where it states which site this is, which skull this is. But I do remember from before, I do believe, if my memory is serving, which it does not always, and I do want to admit that and be upfront about that, but if my memory is serving, I do believe that it is a recreation of Java Man. When we're looking at the tools that they have these new stone tools, right? They create this new technology. We also see that they had the ability to control fire, right? The ability to actually utilize fire in a way that they could make sure that they had fire in their homes and they could make sure that they had fire to cook their food. It is this ability to cook their food with fire that actually gives them the ability to speciate into different species with larger brains. Because what we know now is that the ability to cook our food actually gives us more caloric intake for a smaller amount of food. And when we are looking at brain development, especially in children, and before the closure of the brain development, that the more calories that you have, the more your brain will develop, the bigger your brain will develop too, because these calories all go directly to the brain. When you are looking, excess calories all go directly to the brain when you are a child, when you are younger and your name is, or in your, sorry, somebody said something and it registered in my brain. When your brain is growing, that brain development is really important, right? And so having that ability to have that brain fuck off, Sarah. Have that brain development and have that extra food for that brain development actually does quite a bit for our species and for all the species prior to us. So the reason that Neanderthal has a large brain, and the reason that Homo denisovan has a large brain, and the reason that we have a large brain is because of the fact that Homo erectus was able to utilize fire to cook their food to give them large brain offspring, to give their children larger brains. And this is how we're able to speciate into larger brain children, right? We're able to have larger brain children and therefore become larger brain species. So it is that usage of fire that is able to give them the ability to speciate into the other species that come. The kinnis and kinnis, it's kinnisandkinnis.com, and it's spelled right there, that one right underneath my picture, right? I never said we came from Neanderthals. That's not what I said. We're not even talking about Neanderthals right this moment. So when we are looking at some of the things that Homo erectus had, these are really important things in understanding how Homo erectus is able to become the amazing species that it is, right? And how how Homo erectus was able to make it across the planet. And because Homo erectus was able to make it across the planet, it was able to speciate across the planet into different species. When we are, when we're in different places, all species adapt to the place that they're in, right? Um, as a species, we all become species. Every single species on this planet becomes species to fit a niche in the biome, right? We become species so that the biome is taken care of. Maybe the biome needs somebody who's able to harvest, right? Maybe the biome needs somebody who's able to, care for other animals, right? So this is where we get our species coming in. And as these species come in, these prior human species come in with these abilities, right? These species coming in with these abilities to take care of the animals, to, in the biome, species adapt in different spaces on the biome. And as species adapt in different spaces on the biome, it takes roughly 100 generations for a species to adapt something, right? So for the adaptation for lighter skin that we see in Homo sapiens, that adaptation for lighter skin took roughly 2,500 years to really kind of halfway there, right? So as we're seeing these adaptations and as we're working through these thought processes, we see that Homo erectus moving across the planet is adapting in the environments that they move across the planet in. God, those are just the worst fucking tweezers. Sorry, my tweezing isn't working right. And because of that ability to kind of just adapt in the different spaces that they move into, we see that Homo erectus adapting into the different spaces that they're moving into really become the other species. This is how we see these other species start, right? So if I am one way, and I am one way for the area that I adapted in, that I grew in, that I speciated in, and I move into another area, I'm going to move into that other area with different adaptations, right? Those different adaptations could be anywhere from my skin color to my body mass to my height, right? We see that Homo erectus coming from Africa in a space where there's a lot of heat. When we have a lot of heat, we actually are taller and thinner because that actually gives us the ability to expel heat easier. It gives us the ability to get cooler easier. Your skin is an organ, and one of the purposes of that organ is to retain or dissipate heat. The more of it you have, the easier it is to dissipate, right? Inorganic people. Are you implying I'm an AI? I don't know. Homemade, I think that maybe you don't understand what organic means. I'm just going to say. Because I think that you might think organic means only food and only food that is grown in what we title organic these days, right? Which means that only food that is grown without chemicals, right? Um, But organic really just means like naturally grown, right? And I'm pretty naturally grown, and I've lived more of an organic life than you have. I will guarantee you that. Okay. I will guarantee you because you've never hunted your food. I'll guess that. And you've never grown your own food. I'll guess that. And I spent my entire childhood off grid and backwoods. And so I've lived a more organic life than you have. So you are GMO way more than I am. You grew up on GMO and I did not. Um, and you're a ass, aren't you? Thank you. I was trying to and I couldn't get my finger to it. Like, are you fucking kidding me? Inorganic. Am I an AI? I'd like to be an AI. Okay, I'm missing one more thing. Give me 2 seconds. I'll be right back. Oh, is that them? That is them. Like, I'm missing my tweezers. What happened to my tweezers? Um, so when we're looking at the species prior to us, and we're looking at the way that they're really coming around, right? Ashley, they haven't debunked that. I'm like a scientist. Like, this is my area of scientific study, right? Yeah, but Africa has freshwater springs, and the idea that they don't have freshwater springs is weird. Like, Africa has plenty of freshwater. Africa is so much more diverse in biome than you think. Most people think Africa is just, like, I'm not going to go and look that up. And the reason that I'm not going to go and look that up is because I have 1,000 sources that say different. This is my field. This is what I study. This is what I have degrees in, right? And I don't have a single source that states what you're stating, but I have 100 sources that state differently. A map today is not going to tell you what was going on 2 million to 7 million years ago. And if you think it is, then obviously you need to go study a little bit more science. And you can absolutely give a source, right? I'd love to see a source. I'm not going to go and look it up, right? But you can absolutely, I'm not going by history. Nothing I do is by history. History only goes back 5,000 years. The start of history is 5,000 years old because that's a written story. And I'm not going, right? This is not, no, honey. And you do realize that theory is something that's been proven by evidence, right? So you can sit and listen. Thank you so much, SJT. You can sit and listen or not, but unless you have like a source for that, it's incorrect. I don't know my field, and you do. What do you have degrees in, Ashley? What do you have degrees in, Ashley? What's your field? What do you have degrees in? That's not true, John. Ashley, what are your degrees in? No, a degree teaches how to research, especially scientific degrees. They teach you how to research shit, right? That's what degrees in science give you, is the ability to critically think. That's not true. So in science, a hypothesis is I observe in nature. From my hypothesis, I predict what that hypothesis means, right? What my observation means. And then I test that observation, right? I test that prediction. And if the testing proves true, it's theory. If the testing proves false, I have to go back to the hypothesis. The theory of gravity is proven, but it's also constantly retested. And there's about 5 different theories of gravity. there's a law of gravity, right? Something can be a law and something can be a theory, but a theory is a proven thing, like the theory of gravity it's been proven so far, right? It continuously tests, and when it gets disproven, it's no longer a theory, right? So I was going with the theory because somebody else had said that. I'm not, absolutely not like, but so when we're looking at the movement of Homo erectus outside of Africa, we're seeing that as Homo erectus moves outside of Africa, which everything points to the fact that Homo erectus originates in Africa, just like all the rest of the Homo species other than Neanderthal, Denisovan, Florensis, Luzonensis, the one that speciates here and the one that speciates in Australia that we do not have names for yet, and HLD6, the most recent one that we have found. Just like all of those species, we see that are just like all the other species that do speciate in Africa from Homo erectus, and that Homo erectus actually speciates in Africa. As we're moving across the globe with these other species, we see that as they're moving across the globe, they're taking this information with them. And then as they're taking this information with them, they're also taking a lot of their tools with them. So they're taking the Acheulean hand axe assemblage with them, and they're taking the ability to, oh, that's not going to show. They're taking the Acheulean hand axe assemblage with them. They are taking clothing with them. They're taking usage of fire with them, and they are taking the ability to build some form of a home with them. So we're not really going to leave our safe home unless we have the ability to create more homes. And as we're looking at the newer things that are coming out, like the wood house, right? Um, when we're looking at that, we're seeing that there is evidence of that ability to build homes. There is evidence of the ability to do all of these things, right? And as we are looking at this evidence to do all of these things, we see that this evidence spreads and adapts. So if Homo erectus is moving into West Eurasia and speciating into Homo heidelbergensis and then into Homo Neanderthal. Homo heidelbergensis probably speciates actually in Africa, but then moves out with erectus. It might speciate both, like not both, but like it might have speciated from an adaptation outside of Africa, and then is moving back into Africa. That's not something that we totally know yet because we do see Heidelbergensis outside of Africa and we do see Heidelbergensis inside of Africa, right? And we do know that erectus is whose Homo Heidelbergensis and Homo ancestors speciate from. And we do know that erectus is outside of Africa at 1.8 million years ago, right? So about 200,000 years after their start is in existence. And Homo heidelbergensis is roughly 900,000 years ago, right? I didn't think that they were going to, right? I do believe in multi-regional speciation, which is what we're talking about, right? We are talking about multi-regional speciation. There are species that did not speciate in Africa, right? We're not one of them. And not only are we not one of the species that did not speciated outside of Africa, the species that we speciates inside Africa. The evidence shows that at 7.5 to 8 million years ago, that the missing link, or one of the missing links between us and chimpanzee, is found right outside of Africa. So this is not that the Mediterranean is dry at that time period, and because the Mediterranean is dry at that time period, we see that there are evidences of species like right at the north of the Mediterranean that show the first upright, right? But those species are, like I said, they're an ape, like they look like a chimpanzee, right? So when we get to that, we're looking at 7.5 million years ago. At 7 million years ago, we see Sahelanthropus tadichi in a lake bed in Chad in South Africa, and that is our earliest fully upright, or earliest upright. I don't know if they're fully, I think they're half, because I know that it's the migration down of the foramen magnum, which tells us whether or not somebody is upright. Because if your foramen magnum is at the bottom of your skull, then they're upright. And if it's at the top of your skull or the back of your skull, then you're walking on four legs. If you look at like your dog and your cat, the spine comes out of the back of the head, whereas our spine comes out of the bottom of the head, right? And this is where we can see in the fossil record whether or not a species walked on two legs or walked on four legs. So with that, we're seeing that making it outside of Africa at 2 million years ago, Homo erectus is taking the tools that they have with them, and they're taking their ability to adapt with them. We now know that the alleles for light skin are 900,000 years old. And so we're probably first seeing these alleles for light skin in erectus and in the species that are speciating from erectus. We don't really start to see light skin in Homo sapiens until like 5,000 years ago. We're seeing some lighter skin prior to that, but not light skin until about 5,000 years ago. And that's after they've spent like 5,000 years in Western Europe, right? Or Western Eurasia. So as we're seeing this movement across the world, Homo erectus taking these tools with them across the world and adapting in these different regions really becomes these different species in these different regions. And as they're becoming these different species in these different regions, they are taking the tools and adapting them further. So we're going to see that I'm not a biological anthropologist. I'm a paleoanthropologist. That's different. I don't study biology as much because of the fact that my neurodivergence won't work with DNA. Like the DNA doesn't compute with my neurodivergence. So if you're actually an anthropologist, why would you come into another anthropologist group and start being shitty? You don't have any like evidence. Are you bringing some evidence? Like what are we doing here except for hating on other people? Is that appropriate behavior? Is that how you work within your field? Because that's not how I work. A paleoanthropology is the study of the prior humans, basically. It's the study of the Paleolithic. And it's the study of, I don't know how it actually defines out. I mean, I can tell you what it means to me. It means studying the species before us, right? But there's more to it. It's about studying the Paleolithic. Yeah. Definition by Oxford is branch of anthropology concerned with fossil hominids, which is basically that. It's studying the humans before us, right? He is one of those don't tread on me guys. I'm a war vet, and I have to tell you I'll tread on you every day of the week if you're going to tread on other people's rights, because you're treading on other people's rights. So so when we're seeing them moving across the planet, what we're seeing is as they're moving across the planet and they're taking these different skills with them, they're adapting in these different spaces, which means as we start to see things like light skin and light eyes coming into the human species. It is. And there's all subfields of anthropology. Archaeology is a subfield of anthropology. The degree title is anthropology. Biological anthropology, archaeology, paleoanthropology, Near East archaeology, prehistory archaeology, all of those things all fall underneath the title of anthropology. The degree is in anthropology, right? Cultural and linguistic anthropology, all of them fall underneath the degree of anthropology. The degree is actually anthropology. And so when we're medical is a great one. I know a few people that study medical anthropology. That's where you're going to get biological anthropology as well. And again, like that, I study medicine and I can do medicine, but I can't do DNA. DNA confuses me. And what it is it's not syllabic. I'm a very wordy person, if you can't tell. Very orator orientated, and I write a lot, right? So I'm a very wordy person, and if something doesn't syllabic in my head, then I can't compute it well. And so I don't do DNA very well because I can't compute it well, right? And so uh, it's one of my unfortunate. Well, I don't even feel it's unfortunate. It's one of my things that just doesn't work right for me. So. But they're all fields under the title of anthropology. Even archaeology is a field under the title of anthropology, and they're all about the study of human evolution and the way humanity behaves. Anything that has to do with anthropology has to do with the study of the way that we came to be, who we were before history, and behavioral behavioral aspects, right? Environmental biology is like fuck, like oh. And that, I mean, that's like, it's so needed, and yet it is so confusing on some levels, right? Biological anthropology as an undergrad, that's really fucking cool. That's really awesome. Congratulations. That's really something to follow and to really go for. Like, that creates a lot of change for our world, right? That understanding of the things that you're dealing with really create a lot of changes in our world. And that's a huge, huge thing to me. Um, so as we're looking at that movement out and that carrying of tools and that speciation, this is where we get all the other species that we see, that we think of as coming along the lines, or being at the same time as us, or that we know that we met up with. Currently today we have like 7 species, and that's new. We just found one called, we haven't even named it yet. Currently it's HLD6, and you can look HLD6 up. These ones are all on my website. But we just found HLD6 like a couple of weeks ago. And so what we're dealing with other species currently, we've known for a long time about some of them. Like, we've known for a long time about Neanderthal. Neanderthal is the first one that we found, right? We found Neanderthal in the 1850s. And when we found Neanderthal, we didn't even have a concept. Like, we were just entering into the conceptual idea that we were not 6,000 years old as a species, and then the idea of evolution. And so Neanderthal kind of gave us this idea that we had evolved as well, not just the birds that Darwin was finding and other animals, but that humans had evolved as well, right? And at this point, we were still kind of believing that we were the biblical offspring, and that evolution doesn't happen, and that we're 6,000 years old, right? So when Neanderthal comes into play, the understanding that there's other species out there is really fucking huge. And then after Neanderthal, we don't find any other species of humans for another 150 years, right? So we don't find any other species of human we find Homo erectus and Homo ergaster and Homo heidelbergensis, but no other species that's contemporary with us, right? Until we find Homo florensis in 2003. And we find Homo florensis literally 20 years ago in an island of Flores in Indonesia. And this gives us our first understanding of the ability to cross water prior. There's a lot of, argument as to how this happens. I mean, did they just float out there, or, what the fuck is going on here, right? But when we're looking at this, we now have this understanding of crossing of water a lot earlier than most people think. There is proof that Neanderthals were like crossing water. There's different species that prove that Homo sapien, or not Homo sapien, Homo erectus was crossing water. And so now we have this understanding that we're sitting here crossing water, and we're doing all of these really cool things that we didn't necessarily have before, right? And so as we're dealing with this understanding that we're doing these things that we didn't necessarily believe that we were doing before, our understanding of ourselves starts to change too, right? Because as we're looking into this theory and this thought process that, wow, we crossed water, we have to start seeing that, we actually were doing things a lot sooner than we thought we were, right? Homo florensis is like amazing. The one that really gets me though is Naledi. And Naledi is in Africa. It's from the Rising Star Caves in South Africa. We actually don't find Homo naledi until like 2012. And we found Denisovan before we found Naledi, right? And so Denisovan we find in like 2010, and we find this because so there is something called polymerase chain reaction, and this is something that was developed actually in the 80s. And when it was developed in the 80s, and I cannot remember the name of the woman that developed it, it was something that was used in a lot of medical stuff, but wasn't really used outside of that. And then in 2010, or 2000 and early 2000s, Svante Pablo, who just won the Nobel Peace Prize for this, was able to use polymerase chain reaction to sequence a Neanderthal genome. And by sequencing that Neanderthal genome, they were able to do a lot of different discoveries. And in all those different discoveries, there's the Denisova cave in Russia. And the Denisova cave in Russia is actually got like hundreds and thousands of fucking bones in it, like just hundreds of thousands of bones. And all of these bones in this cave are actually very small fragments. Like the largest of the bones in these caves is just a couple of inches. And so they start sequencing these bones that they're finding in these caves. And in sequencing these bones that they're finding in this cave, not in these caves, but in this cave, they sequence a bone, a finger bone that they think is Neanderthal at the time when they sequence it. And then when they sequence it, they find that that finger bone is actually an entirely new species. And this is where we come up with Homo denisovan in like 2010. Now, after Homo denisovan, we see the start of the understanding that, there's some other species out there, and we're doing all of this DNA research. We find in 2012 an entirely new species, and this is found in a cave in outside of Johannesburg in South Africa. This is called the Rising Star Cave System. And this species is defying everything. This species currently today is defying all the laws and understanding that we've had. For one, we're looking at a species that was able to transport fire through tunnels and caves. And our understanding was that this was not possible at this time period, but we're seeing that they not only do this, but they do it continuously to return to spaces where they have interred people. So we're seeing with Naledi that there's just this amazing advancement, right? That starts like 35,000 years before we even come on the scenes, right? Caleb, do you stake your belief on science, or are you a blind faith kind of person? Right? Because a finger bone sequence through DNA is science. So I stake my belief on science, right? So when we see this new species in this cave, and we don't really get a whole lot of the information on Naledi that we have today until recently. Like most of this is just coming out recently, and we're like, holy shit. After we find Naledi, we find... So again, we've gone from Neanderthal in the 1850s to Florensis in 2003 to Denisovan by doing DNA sequence on a finger bone, to Naledi in the Rising Star Caves in South Africa, which was found by a couple of geologists, to Luzonzensis. Luzonzensis becomes the next one that we find, and this is on an island in the South Pacific. This is on an island in the Philippines, right? Now, when we look at any evidence of any species being in these islands, from the island of Flores to finding people in the Philippines, all of this is a water crossing. When we're looking at the world at a few 100,000 years ago, what we're looking at is that the sea levels are absolutely lower, but there is something called the Wallace Trench between Asia, Southeast Asia, and Australia. And the Wallace Trench is so deep that it has never been above water, right? It's always been underwater, no matter what the glacial pattern shifts are, and what's underwater and what land masses are available. It's always been able to. It's always been underwater, always underwater. It's always needed the ability to cross water to get to it, and because it's always needed that ability to cross water to get to it, any species that we find below the Wallace Trench of Homo sapien had to cross, or not of Homo sapien, of Homo, had to cross water to get there. So we see that Homo florensis and Homo luzonensis show us this evidence of crossing water to get to the space that they're at. And we see that Homo florensis is like 100 to 200,000 years old and is possibly actually still around. There is the person, the PhD in anthropology who has been studying Homo florensis this entire time. Actually, the locals, the indigenous groups, have been stating that there's sightings within the last 50 years of this group of people. And that's what they're calling them, of a community of people that is small with large feet, which is Homo florensis, because Homo florensis is very literally the hobbit species. Its height is 3.5 at its height, so like 3 feet 5 inches, I think, and its feet are actually kind of large. So we call this our hobbit species, right? So when we see that our hobbit species on the island of Flores in Indonesia is like, first of all, it got there and it speciated there. This is something we call island dwarfism. We have something called island dwarfism and island giganticism, and we see this in other species. And so you've probably actually heard of island dwarfism and island giganticism. Island dwarfism and island giganticism states that if you are in a space that is small, and you don't have a whole lot of large predators and you don't have a whole lot of food options, you will shrink to adapt to that space. Again, this is what we were talking about with adaptation, right? No, baby, that's style. You should get some. So this is adaptation at work. So when we're looking at island dwarfism, we're seeing adaptation at work. We're adapting to the space that we're in. So Homo florensis in a space that does not have a lot of space, does not have a lot of predators, and does not have a lot of food actually adapts as a smaller species, like island dwarfism will do with any species. So this is how we get a species that we term the hobbit that's 3 foot 5 inches, right? And so when we're looking at the other species that we're seeing in the area, we're seeing that below the Wallace Trench in the island of the Philippines in Luzon, where we see Homo luzonensis, that they also follow the lines of island dwarfism. So you see that Homo luzonensis is actually about 4 foot 8, I think, is the height of Homo luzonensis. There's not a whole lot of information on Homo luzonensis yet because of the fact that they're very new species, very new discovery. And so we're still getting information on them, right, as a public. Even as anthropologists and archaeologists, we're still acquiring information. And what happens is you get one or two people down here studying it. And as they get the information, they compile the information, they look at the information. What could this mean? What does this do? And then they start releasing the information to the public. And they might release all of it at once in a study, or they might release little bits and pieces here and there, or they might do a whole documentary like the Cave of Bones on Naledi, right? But even then, it took, like a decade. And it took we see that Lee Berger was releasing information as lectures and stuff like that. Oh, no, I really can't recommend on that Pie Queen. A lot of times what happens with museums is they'll send like certain exhibits around. And so if you watch your local museum and see, you might see evidence of, different people coming or you might see different exhibits coming, and you might get an early hominin exhibit that's coming into your local. And so I would just keep an eye on your local and see. If you haven't watched Unknown Cave of Bones on Netflix, your child might actually really be into that. It is the Lee Berger documentary on Homo naledi, and it is beautiful in the way it's done. And so they might actually find some real interest in that too. Most of the time, though, with all exhibits, what they do is they kind of just move around the country. So it might be in one museum this time and another museum next time. But I'm actually not even sure if I know of any good hominin exhibit here in the United States. Like I can't think of one that I've even seen here in the United States, right? So I'm not sure if I even could recommend, just because I don't even think Part of growing up backwoods and off grid and really dirt floor poor is that I don't think I've even got to go to a lot of museums until in the last like 6 years, right? So that's a good idea. And virtual museums are really good for it too these days. A lot of stuff is on virtual. Um, the San Diego Museum of Natural History, I know, has some stuff that they've been working on, but I don't know if they have hominin exhibits. But they've been working on the finds here that predate Homo sapien, like the 130,000-year-old Cerruti Macedon find comes out of the San Diego Museum of Natural History. So you might actually find some information through that too. That's pretty cool, and that might give you some, depending on where you're at, of course. Though, like I said, a lot of exhibits will move around. So if it's not in your space now, it might be in your space later. So I would keep an eye on it, right? So when we're looking at the islands in the South Pacific, we can see with these islands that they absolutely have to cross water to get there. And again, we're seeing that Homo erectus is moving across the world with these really cool tools and these really cool understandings. And as they move across the world with these really cool tools and these really cool understandings, and they're adapting in these different places and becoming these really cool different species that we see now, that they're carrying with them the knowledge that Homo erectus is giving them, the knowledge of how to use fire, the knowledge of how to use stone tools, and the adaptations of different stone tools, right? And so you're seeing that there is different adaptations of stone tools that are coming out of different species. The Neanderthal has their entire own fucking tool complex, stone tool complex, and it's pretty advanced. Some of the other species like Heidelbergensis have some better tool complexes than the erectus does, than Homo erectus does. And you see that Flores and or Florensis seems to have its own tool complex as well, which is really cool. We actually see that Naledi actually has its own tool that is unique. They actually have an art tool for carving into cave walls. And this is again like 335 to 235,000 years ago. So we're seeing that Homo naledi actually has like some pretty cool, unique tools in and of themselves as well. After we find Florensis and Luzonensis, right about the same time actually that we find Luzonensis, there is this understanding that a skull that we have from the 70s is probably a new species. And this is where we hear, like last year or the year before, this evidence of Homo longi. Homo longi is named after where it's found, like all of these other species. It was found in the Long caves in China, and Long is I do not know if it's Mandarin or a different language within Chinese language groups for dragon. And so these are the dragon caves. And so Homo longi is the dragon man. We aren't sure yet if Homo longi is an entire species. And the reason being is because we haven't found a skull of Homo denisovan, and we haven't gotten DNA out of Homo longi. All we have of Homo longi is their skull cap, and we don't have a DNA from that skull cap. And so if we don't have a skull cap, Drip, you need to take that away. I don't know what it is you're doing there, but that's a word that we all know is not appropriate, right? When it comes to talking about people. Just because, right? That's so when we're looking at Homo longi, we're not sure yet whether or not Homo longi is actually Denisovan. And the reason being, again, is because all we have from Homo longi is a skull cap, which we do not have from Denisovan. What we have from Denisovan really all fits in the palm of your hand. We have like a mandible, we have like a base of a skull, we have a finger bone, we have a thigh bone, but that one is half Denisovan and half Neanderthal. That's Denny, who we've talked about in here. And so we don't have a whole lot of like bone structure of Denisovan, and we don't have a skull type, it's skull cap type of Denisovan. And because we don't have those things, we don't know if Homo longi is actually Homo denisovan's skull. how we'll be able to find that is going to be one or two ways. We're either going to find another skull cap and we're going to be able to DNA it, and that other skull cap is going to show, hey, it's going to show that they were that they're actually, it's a Denisovan or it's a whole new species, or we're going to find a Denisovan skull cap, like within the Denisova cave, and go, okay, so that's Denisovan, and we're DNAing it, and it comes back, right? So, and we're going to see whether or not that skull cap, if that skull cap doesn't match Longi, then we know that Longi isn't a Denisovan skull. But for now, we're kind of halfway between the idea that this is an entirely different species or it's just a Denisovan skull. You'll see that there's a couple of different theories and thought processes with that, and that we don't really have a designated, yes, this is it yet. Recently is when we found the seventh species. We do not have a name for this species yet. What we're calling this species is HLD6. And this species is found in a cave in China as well. And this species has some really weird combinations of features. Hey, Odin. And the weird combinations of we see of features within HLD6 is that they almost have our chin. Not quite, but the start of it. And they have a flat face. But they have the extramolar gap that you're going to see in like Neanderthal and every other species but us. 300,000 years old is this. We only have one find for this species, right? It's a child's grave. Okay, so and this is 300,000 years old, and this is in China. And this species within China, we see that there's a weird combination of features between us and kind of Neanderthals or erectus. And because of this weird combination of features between us and kind of Neanderthals or erectus, it's a new species. There are traits that we see in both species, but there's also traits that are original for this species. And because of that, we're looking at an entirely new species. Again, we haven't named it yet. They also recently found within that one that there is also another ghost species. We've talked in here before about ghost species. And ghost species, just like we see Neanderthal and Denisovan in our DNA, and we know that that's Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA because we found Neanderthal and Denisovan within the fossil record, so we have a full genome to compare it to. We've also found other little threads of DNA within our DNA. They've decided it's not a possible hybrid because it has its own basal features, basal being unique to a species. Like our chin is a basal feature. Nobody else has a pointed chin. And so because they have their own unique features, their own basal traits, we're looking at this as a new species with HLD6. This idea of ghost species, again, is species that we see fingerprints of this species of them in our DNA. We see like a strand that doesn't look like a sapien strand. It's a genetic that's not a sapien genetic, right? And so when we see that, we're seeing that there's another species, but because we don't have a genome to compare it to, we don't know what that species is. We don't have a name for that species. We don't know who the species is. And so we call these ghost species. Now we've talked in here about 5 that we've seen in our DNA and 1 that we've seen in Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA, but HLD6 gives us evidence of a 7th ghost species as well, or along with the HLD6 find. And I don't think that they actually found it in HLD6 because I do not believe that they've sequenced HLD6 DNA yet. But they do find evidence of a 7th ghost species. Now, when we've talked about ghost species in here, we've gone over the fact that we can see ghost species in 2 populations, 2 communities in Africa. The 2 communities in Africa that don't seem to have Neanderthal DNA within them actually have ghost species DNA within them. And then we can see ghost species DNA in indigenous Australians and in indigenous Turtle Islanders and Abiyalians. Turtle Island is an indigenous phrase for North America, translated into English, obviously. And Abiyala is an indigenous phrase for South America, if you are unaware. So we see within indigenous Turtle Islanders and indigenous Abialians and indigenous Australians, I think I got glue on my lip, that there is ghost species. These actually correlate with a couple of finds that we have here in Turtle Island in the Western Hemisphere and a couple of finds in Australia. And so we see that there are roughly, that we came in contact with, at least 7 other species that we came in contact with. We do have ghost DNA here in Turtle Island. And so when we're looking at how Homo erectus is spreading across the planet, we see that Homo erectus made it to areas that we haven't found Homo erectus fossils in, but we see evidence of them. So here in Turtle Island, there are finds that are 250,000 years old. There's a 250,000 years old Heoloka in southern tip of Mexico, and Heoloka is the dating on it. The dating that goes closest to our timeline says that it's 80,000 years old, 50,000 years old. There's a couple of different on it. And then if you push it, if you look at the other datings, one dating states 250,000 years old and one dating states 800,000 years old. And this is Heoloka, and this is evidence of Homo erectus making it here. This is stone tools. This is paintings. This is carved animal features. Like, this is a lot of stuff that shows humans at 250,000 years. I'm going with the middle dating on it, 250,000 years here in Turtle Island. And then when we look at the Cerruti mastodon find, which there is no debate, Heoloka has some debate on the dating, but the Cerruti mastodon find has no debate whatsoever on the dating. And the Cerruti mastodon find is 130,000 years old. These are evidences of Homo erectus making it to Turtle Island, specifically because the Cerruti mastodon find is in San Diego, California, and the Heoloka one is in Mexico, making it to Turtle Island and living here, speciating here, adapting here. And so when we look at the fact that there is a ghost species in indigenous Turtle Island DNA and indigenous Abialian DNA, we can see that this is that ghost species. We don't have the actual species. We haven't found the actual species in the fossil record again, so we don't have a name on them. But this is evidence of a species being here in Turtle Island. Now, this does not mean that indigenous Turtle Islanders or Nyabialians are not indigenous Turtle Islanders and Nyabialians, because there was another species here before them. What it means is that when indigenous Abialians and indigenous Turtle Islanders as Homo sapiens arrive, which newest dating on that is 50,000 years ago by the southern boat route. So when Homo sapien arrives in Abiyala and Turtle Island at 150 or at 50,000 years ago by the southern boat route, they're coming into a space that has a species already there. And like Homo sapien does prior to 10,000 years ago everywhere across the globe, Homo sapien intermixes with this other species, right? Because prior to 10,000 years ago, when we see these different species, we're not a species that kills them off. There's no evidence of us killing off any of these other species. All evidence points to intermingling with them, to marrying them, essentially, if using modern terminology, to marrying them essentially, because we are breeding with them, we are having children with them, we are living with them, we are in communities with them, right? And so when we're looking at that, we're seeing the evidence that we are all actually intermingling. So the ghost species that we see within Abiyalians and Turtle Islanders that is only seen here within these groups, within the communities here, is absolutely going to be that species that we see from the Cerruti mastodon find or from Heoloka, right? And if you read anything on the Cerruti mastodon find, it will tell you that this is a Homo erectus species, that this is not a Homo sapien species, which totally gives that understanding of there being other species here and of the way that intermingling is happening, and of the fact that Homo erectus is really able to go anywhere, right? Homo erectus is making it across the globe. So we see that this making it across the globe gets them into really every continent. When we say across the globe, we mean really across the globe. So we end up seeing with Neanderthal and Denisovan that we are finding them pretty much all over Well, Neanderthal we're finding pretty much all over Western Eurasia, and Denisovan we're starting to find more of in Eastern Eurasia. Um, and we see them in our DNA. And the seeing of them in our DNA actually will show migration patterns. So again, these are species that speciate from Homo erectuses and Homo erectus and Homo erectus subspecies in different areas. And as they speciate in these different areas, they adapt to these different spaces and they take these different needs of these different spaces and working within the different needs of the different spaces, they become the species that that space needs, just like we have become the species that South Africa or Africa, because the newest evidence is that our species actually speciates all over Africa and not just one part of it. Um, just like Africa needed our species within it to create that balance, right? Species speciates to create balance, right? So when we're looking at that species speciating to create balance theory and understanding, that's more understanding than anything else, I would state. Species speciating to create balance. The balance that we're creating is important. The balance within the biome that humans create, and I mean humans all the way back to Homo erectus, the balance in the biome that humans create all the way back to Homo erectus is an extremely important balance in the biome, just like any animal creates a balance in the biome, and it's an extremely important place. We talk a lot, casually about things like the circle of life and this understanding that, we need to have trees to have air and shit like that. But we don't often talk about what that means for us, mainly because we have this idea that for some reason we're superior to all other species. And so we obviously didn't speciate for the same reason all other species speciated, because we're special and we're chosen, right? But the reality is that all species speciates to be a part of the biome. All species come into speciate. All species speciate so that they can participate in the needs of the biome, because the biome needs something, and so because the biome needs something, it creates the solution for what it needs, right? And in the creating of the solution for what it needs, it created humans, right? So, and again, when we talk about humans, anything that is the species Homo um, falls underneath the genus Homo, right? Because species is underneath the genus Homo. Our genus is Homo, and our species is Sapien. So anything that falls underneath the species Homo or the genus Homo is a human. And as we're looking at that, we can see that everything that falls underneath the genus Homo is created in a harmonic way with nature. It's created to suit a space within nature. The space that we suit within nature, the space that we work within nature is tending, it's care, it's ensuring the care of the environment, right? That is the space that Homo sapien sits in within nature. We like to think that we sit above, but we don't. We like to think that we are above, but we are not. This was not created for us. We were created for it. The idea that this was, if you view the creator as the biome itself and the earth itself, yes. Because again, we are looking at what I'm trying to explain is the idea that we were created by something and that all of this was created to suit us instead of we were created to suit it is a really false thought process that way too often we deal with, right? There's way too many people out there who believe that God made us and therefore, we're special and somehow like the biggest and the baddest, and therefore everything is created to fucking help us, right? Instead of realizing that things aren't created to help us, we were created to help others. And that's the big thing. We were created to help others. We were not created to be greedy. We were not created so that everything could do for us. We were literally created to by the biome to fulfill a niche within that biome so that creatures within that biome could be healthier and happier. Creatures within that biome could be, better suited, able to exist in a healthier way, right? So when we're looking at that and understanding that we are not this special being that was created by some mystical being to, be his children and be chosen, and we understand instead that we were created as part of a whole. right? That we are a part of a whole entire biome, then we can start to move past this kind of exploitative, selfish space that we're in that tells us that it's okay to exploit everything else. And that really the only reason we're here is to serve something else, right? To serve a god, or to serve a king, or to serve, basically greed, because that's really what it is at this point, is we're all kind of serving greed. And the understanding that we're not created as this special and above being, but just created as a part of the rest of the biome to become or to be the healthy part of the biome, right? Understanding that becomes really important within that concept. Um, so it's important when we're looking at this to understand that all of these different species are created for the same entire purpose. We're all created to fill a niche, to suit a niche, to ensure the safety of the whole, right? We're all created for a community thought process. We're all created to suit within a community and ensure the community's safety as a whole. We seem to have this idea that that's not it. Like, we have this really big idea that really we're just here to, enjoy life and to, like, get as much out of it as we can. And if that means that we have to step on a few different bodies to get there, fuck off, doesn't matter. But the reality is that, you know, do I believe that we're kind of created? Yes, but I don't believe that we're created in the way that most people do. We are created by the biome. We are created by the earth itself, like the earth itself creates every other living being on it. We are an evolution and an adaptation to ensure the safety of a world, right? To ensure the safety of animals, to ensure the safety of trees, to ensure the safety of everything within that biome, right? Which we tend to think is not true. We tend to think that, oh, we're special and we're great, and so therefore everything within this is created to serve us. But we're not. Nothing was created to serve us. We were created to serve it. We were created to take a part, to be a community. And our lack of that is actually getting us into a space, and has been for a long time, where we're not healthy mentally, we're not healthy physically, and the world around us is no longer healthy, right? Thank you. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and they're like, I'm like, I try and be really, really precise about things. Like, I noticed that. Like, you like try and be really precise. And I was explaining the whole Jane Elliott situation that happened a few months ago. I was like, I realized then that I really just need to be as precise as possible about my wording so that people really hear it. And if I need to correct it, I can correct it. But, make sure that they're hearing exactly what I'm trying to say and not something completely different, because so often we do hear different things than what somebody is trying to say. And I want to make sure that people are not um, able to take from me information that I'm not trying to give. Like, I don't want people to, get information that's not the information I'm trying to give from me. So I'm trying my best to be extremely precise in the things that I say, or rather, trying to be extremely healthy in the things that I say, so that it's not creating a dishealth, right? Not creating problems. So I appreciate that. I also am really trying to ensure that when I talk to people that I'm heard. And so I try and ensure that I meet people in a kind way. And instead of reacting, I actually interact. And I'm going to say talk on somebody's level, but not as in like, oh my God, you're third grade reading level kind of stuff, but as in, your understanding, so that it can be a broader understanding, right? So that people can hear. A lot of times we don't want to hear things that are combating our understanding, or combating the things that we believe we should be doing, right? And so, because we don't want to hear those things that combat, if I can talk in a level that isn't combative, and actually can let you see things through your own lens, then I feel like it gets more information out there. And that's really the whole point, is just to get the information out there so that people understand. With all of those things that we're just talking about, though, it's really important to talk about who we are as a species. Like, we seem to think, again, that we're like this species that's, like we've won some great prize, or like this is a gift to us, that we're set apart and that we're set above. Like, You tell people that we're part of the animal kingdom, and people were like, I'm not a fucking animal. I'm not a gorilla. And it's like, but we are all part of the animal kingdom. Being mammals means, we're part of the animal kingdom, right? And so when we're looking at that, understanding that we aren't as set apart and above as we seem to think we are, actually engenders a lot of compassion within us, right? Most people aren't aware, but we are nonviolent as a species until recently. Thank you, thank you. Until the last 10,000 years, we really don't have violence as a species. We see within the last 10,000 years that there is this huge, huge rise. We're not even the smartest animal. I think dolphins take that like title. I think dolphins are like the smartest animal. But we see this rise of violence starting at 10,000 years ago, right? And at 10,000 years ago, with this rise of violence, we also see this ownership of property. And how are you measuring intelligence would be really the thing to ask, right? So if you're deciding that we're the smartest beings on the planet, how are you measuring what intelligence is? Because most human beings measure intelligence by how we can manipulate our surroundings. They don't measure intelligence really on any other level. What kind of tools can you create? What technology do you have? We measure our intelligence in those theories. Yet when you measure intelligence by synapses within the brain, or you measure intelligence by the ability to interact with other species, or you measure intelligence by language, or you measure intelligence by being able to be a part of instead of set yourself apart from, we see that dolphins are actually thousands more intelligent. And that's old science. Like, we've known that one for a hot minute, that dolphins are actually more intelligent than we are. Like, that's not even a new thought process. So again, if you measure intelligence, by how can I adapt the world around me to suit me, then yes, maybe maybe we are more intelligent. I personally believe that it takes more intelligence to work within the environment than it does to change the environment to suit you. I personally think that when we look at communities, a really good example on this one for me is the fact that when Europeans invade Turtle Island and Abiyala, they're dirty and they're disease ridden. They're living in cities that they're throwing their waste into the street. Everybody has cholera every year, like they're sick constantly, and half of them are starving, right? And when you get to Turtle Island and Abiyala, the Europeans document what they find. And when they document, I don't think it's easier to work with the environment. I said it's healthier, it's better, it's more right? So when we see the Europeans getting to Turtle Island and Abiyala, they document what they find. And what they document is the advancements that are here, right? That we're not seeing anywhere else. This picture is shown as dark skin because this picture is of a Homo erectus. It's over 1,000,000 years ago, and the light skin alleles don't come onto the scene until 900,000 years ago. So this Homo erectus was absolutely of dark skin. And I use kinase and kinase images because you can see the humanity within kinase and kinase images that you can't see within most others, right? And I like showing the humanity within these early humans. And so I use kinase and kinase images. This Homo erectus, again, is, I think, 1.2 million years old. And we do not see the alleles for light skin until 900,000 years old, or 900,000 years ago. Based on what evidence, Blue? First of all, I mean, it's obviously a recreation, because obviously, like, we don't have pictures of Homo erectus. And it's a recreation based on knowledge and based on a skull. Like, they took a skull and formed an image over the skull and based it on the current scientific knowledge of what Homo erectus was at 1.2 million years ago, right? So I'm not sure what you think is false about it. I mean, I'm willing to listen, but I'm really not sure what you think is false about it because of the fact that it's, I mean, an accurate representation based on a skull. and shows a lot of humanity, and as at a time prior to the alleles for light skin having been developed in any species of human. Trying to put that exactly where I need it to be. No, the skull does not give complexion, but the fact that we don't have alleles for light skin at the point of time that this human was alive does give the complexion, right? My reasoning for dolphins being smarter than humans. Dolphins have extensive language. Dolphins have been able to work with humans, and this has been documented for for thousands of years. And we see within dolphins that they actually have a greater synapses firing in their brains than we do. The greater synapses is firing in their brains is what we consider the rate of intelligence. That's why we say that we're more intelligent than Neanderthals, because our synapses fire faster than Neanderthals' synapses fire. So dolphin synapses fire faster than our synapses fire. And so if dolphin synapses fire faster than ours, and the faster the synapses fire, the more intelligent you are, then dolphins are therefore more intelligent than us. I am not saying a lack of evidence. I am saying the evidence shows. I am giving you evidence. I'm telling you what the evidence is and what the evidence shows. So there's not a lack of evidence there. It's the actual evidence that shows that the alleles for light skin are only 900,000 years old. This is science. This has been proven by paleoanthropologists. This has been proven by geneticists. And if the alleles for light skin are only 900,000 years old, and this being is from 300,000 years prior to that, there's no light skin alleles to have. The only alleles that we have at that time are dark skin. So it wouldn't be anything else. And that's based on the scientific evidence. And I gave you the evidence too. When we're looking at living in concert, we see that the Europeans document when they get here, right? That the groups here are living in vast cities. Like when we read documentation of several of the nations on the East Coast, we see actually vast cities of hundreds of thousands of people within a city structure. And those vast cities are actually like so enmeshed in the landscape around them that sometimes you can't even tell they're there until you're right up on them. And within these vast cities, there is not the lack of sanitation that is found in European cities at the time. And so there's also not the abundance of disease. It is well known to anybody who studies anthropology or history or civilization that cities bring disease, period, when we're looking at Europe. And because of the fact, and this is because of the fact that when we look at Europe, the way that Europe manages its food, the way that those who follow the Western agricultural city thought process manage their food, because this is not just Europe, is not healthy. So when you're storing an abundance of grain in grain silos, you actually get rats, and rats bring disease. When you do not have a place for everybody to be able to relieve their bodily waste, right? You are bringing disease in that as well. So we're looking at cities in Europe and in other parts of the world outside of the Western Hemisphere who are very disease ridden because of the way that they're storing their food and because of the way that they are the way that they're defecating, the way that they're relieving themselves, right? And so those two things actually contribute, and that and the fact that they're stacked on top of each other really helps this contribution too, because we find apartment buildings as old as Rome, or as far back as in Rome. So all of this stuff has this tendency to bring disease into cities. Whereas here within Turtle Island, the documentations of cities in Turtle Island and in Abiyala is documentations of vast cities of people that you can't really even tell it's a city until you're right up on it, because it's such a part of the landscape around it for many of them. And because of the way that they are taking care of their food, you're not seeing the abundance of rats, right? And because of the way that they are relieving themselves, going out into the woods, because you're living as a part of the woods. And so going out and peeing on a tree is, easy enough when the tree's right fucking there, instead of peeing in a fucking bucket and throwing it out on people's heads in the street every morning, right? We're seeing documentation by the Europeans of this living so much closer to nature, actually being so much healthier. Like they document a lack of disease, they document a lack of starvation, they document a lack of elders and orphans being without, right? This is all stuff that is seen documented in pretty much any indigenous space across the globe because when you look at indigenous spaces, the way that they interact with the land, the animistic way that they interact with the land is healthier for the land and healthier for them. And so um, this is for me where we can get that understanding that just because we think we're more technologically advanced doesn't mean we're actually smarter, right? Just because you think that you have technology doesn't mean that that technology is actually healthy for you. Doesn't mean that that technology is actually doing anything for you. Doesn't mean that that technology is actually like creating a healthier society, ensuring the fact that everybody's eating, ensuring the fact that we're going to be here in 100 years, right? Whereas someone or an animal, because we were talking about dolphins at the start of this conversation, is interacting with nature and living within the biome instead of trying to uh, adjust the biome to the point that you are robbing from the biome or you're stepping outside of what your purpose in the biome is, are actually smarter. Because to me, you're living in a healthier manner, right? And so if you're living in a healthier manner, and it means that the sustainability of yourself and your people, or in this case, dolphins, is longer, that to me is much smarter than your cell phone, which is some evidence shows killing you, right? Advancement doesn't necessarily mean that you're advancing. I thought we knew that as humans. Like I did think that that was common knowledge that advancement doesn't necessarily mean that you're advancing. Like one person's advancement doesn't necessarily mean advancement. So that is another reason why I say dolphins are smarter. We see other animals on this planet that are smarter. We know that chickens have empathy. Did you know that chickens have empathy? They've done scientific studies that show that chickens have empathy, right? Lots of animals have empathy. Lots of animals have high intelligence. Sometimes high intelligence says you don't need to change anything, you just need to live, right? Sometimes high intelligence means you don't need to change anything, you don't need to live. Well, this is a Homo erectus, and this is because this 2 million year old or 1.2 million year old Homo erectus was alive before the alleles for light skin developed. We don't see the alleles for light skin in Homo sapiens until relatively recently. So we see that Neanderthals were absolutely of lighter skin because Homo erectus and their Homo heidelbergensis speciation actually starts developing the alleles for light skin. And when they start developing the alleles for light skin at 900,000 years ago, they pass those alleles down into heidelbergensis and into Neanderthal. And as they're passing those alleles down into heidelbergensis and into Neanderthal, we start to see lighter skin. And it should be understood that that is a scale. It doesn't mean Northern European white. It means, anything from, a lighter shade of what we might consider dark to, a darker shade of what we might consider light, right? And so those alleles start developing at, again, 900,000 years ago. So we see them in Homo heidelbergensis and we see them in Homo neanderthal, but we don't see them anywhere else until later on, right? And when we look at us ourselves, we don't see that we start to get lighter skinned until roughly 5,000 years ago. When we might see a couple of light-skinned individuals prior to that within us, but we don't see light skin as being something that you see really any majority of the population. Yes, this is a skull from Java in Indonesia, and it's 1.2 million years old. And again, as I was saying, we do not see that the light skin comes in until we do not see the light skin allele comes in until 900,000 years ago. So 300,000 years after this person in Indonesia, this Homo erectus species prior to us, right? Why would you think that? So where did the light skin come from? So the light skin, I don't know what you think a caveman is, Jojo. The light skin comes from adaptation. Homo erectus making it into Eurasia, adapts in Eurasia, and as they become Homo heidelbergensis and Homo neanderthal and adapting in Eurasia, they adapt with lighter skin because they need the lighter skin alleles in that area. That's just an adaptation. The amazing thing is not the light skin adaptation. The amazing thing is the adaptation, right? And so, actually, dark skin is actually way more beneficial to us as a species. Dark skin does a hell of a lot more for us as a species. The adaptation for light skin only works in specific areas, right? I don't study chimps, so I could not tell you. What I study is humans, and I'm telling you what the scientists say about humans, right? I'm telling you what the scientists say about Homo erectus. I don't study chimps, right? And I don't know what chimps in Africa look like. We're all related anyways. So nobody was, I don't know of anybody that was living in caves 1,000 years ago. Hundreds of thousand years ago, maybe, right? We are all related. That's been pretty proven. And caveman is a misnomer, right? We are all related. Yeah, we are all the same species. If you want to go anywhere else, you're just diving into white supremacy. If you want to take it to anything other than we're all the same species, you're diving into white supremacy. Um, the idea that race exists is a white supremacist idea. We've debunked the theory of race, like race doesn't exist. People still live in mountains everywhere. That doesn't make them cavemen. And again, cavemen is a misnomer, right? We've been out of caves for 500,000 years. They just found wooden structures in Homo heidelbergensis, right? They weren't scared of the sunlight. They lived in non-sunlight areas. So, um, speciation is an adaptation to an area, right? So if you're adapting to an area, you're going to adapt so you can live in that area in the healthiest possible way. So species that adapt in Africa and species within Africa in an area that has really high sun content for most of it, because not all of Africa does, are going to speciate with a darker skin tone because we all have melanin in our skin, right? The melanin in our skin is more concentrated or less concentrated dependent on which region along the equator that we live, which region along the equator that the sun is impacting that we're on. So if you are along an equatorial region that's extremely high in sun content, you're going to adapt specifically for that area. And if you're in an equatorial region that's extremely low in sun content or has a lot of cloud cover, you're going to adapt specifically to that area. So how do we adapt? Yes, some people in Africa are right, right? So how do we adapt? Yeah, I don't even know what you're stating at that point, Blue. So how do we adapt for a specific area? So for Homo erectus and the other Homo species that develop within Africa, they have a tendency to develop with darker skin, a higher concentration of melanin in the skin, because the higher concentration of melanin in the skin protects from a few things. It protects from the UV rays, so you're less likely to get skin cancer. It protects from burn. That doesn't mean that people who have dark skin don't burn. It just is an extra protection against burning, right? So they're more capable of being out in the heavy sunlight. Um, it also sees the adaptation with actually tightly coiled hair, which was studies done by a Black anthropologist who also was a hairdresser. And so she did a bunch of these studies and she found that tightly coiled hair actually comes from being in a region where there's heavy sun. And so the tightly coiled hair will create kind of like a shade and a lattice work. And so you'll have air blowing through it. So it will cool the skull so your skull doesn't get too hot, right? You also see that people in a high sun content area are going to develop tall and lean. right? And in that developing tall and lean, that's because your epidermis or your skin is the largest organ in your body. And that epidermis actually, or your skin actually has a couple of different functions. And one of those functions is the dissipation of heat or the retention of heat. And when you have more of your skin, you dissipate heat easier. So you develop tall and lean in a space where you have heavy sun so that you can dissipate the heat from your body easier, right? So these are three different adaptations based on sunlight and region. Now, when you see that Homo erectus leaves Africa and starts moving throughout the planet and it starts creating other species throughout the planets through adaptation, you see that the light skin allele comes in spaces that have less sun. So when Heidelbergensis and Neanderthal develop in a space that have less sun, what you're seeing is their development is you're seeing less of a concentration of melanin. This doesn't necessarily, yes, we talk often about, like this is so that you can get more vitamin D from the sun. You can get vitamin D from other spaces, right? So it's not even just for that. Recent studies have shown that light skin actually provides more, that the shade actually provides more heat. And you see that like Neanderthal and Heidelbergensis are developing shorter. And they're developing shorter because, again, when you're looking at the skin itself, if you have more skin, it dissipates heat more. And if you have less skin, it retains heat more. So Neanderthal and Heidelbergensis are developing shorter so that they can retain their heat better. And you also see that they're developing with hair that lies closer to the scalp so that it's not creating that lattice work, right? So when we're looking at this, what we're looking at is adaptation to region. And we know or should know that when we're looking at, um, I I can explain big tall Vikings too. So when we're looking at that adaptation for region, what we're looking at is that that adaptation takes 100 generations to like one adaptation takes 100 generations, right? And that those adaptations for region are totally based on the region themselves. Some adaptations you can take into any region healthily. Some adaptations you can't. So the adaptation for light skin, you can't take that into Africa before we get to the point where we've got coverage, or at least most parts of Africa. Some parts of Africa are not heavy sun content. There's an entire swath of Africa that's not heavy sun content. It's like rainforest, right? So when we're looking at taking that light skin into an area that has a heavy sun content, that light skin is actually going to be disadvantageous. It's going to cause problems for someone, right? And so we see that dark skin is actually something that can be done across the planet healthily, and light skin is not. So the advantage, the evolutionary advantage, is actually dark skin. Dark skin can be used in places across the planet, whereas light skin cannot be used in places across the planet, right? So when we're looking at species speciating in a space that has a high sun content, we know that they speciate darker because of the fact that they need that darker skin to protect them from the sun. They need those different, and again, we get back to the fact that we're not created by something, we're created by the biome, right? God doesn't create us, we evolve within the biome to suit the biome. So if we're evolving within the biome to suit the biome, we're adapting to the biome, right? Our body is speciating in a way that suits the biome that we're in. So you're not going to speciate for a way that suits a biome that you've never fucking experienced, right? And yes, putting in terms of evolutionary advantage or evolutionary step forward as light skin being those things is absolutely the basis for early race science, which is why I'm stating specifically that the advantage is not light skin. The advantage is dark skin. Dark skin is the advantage, right? Not light skin, because we've heard for 100 years that light skin is the advantage, and light skin means we have evolved faster because a bunch of old fucking white men wanted to continue to make atrocities and they needed to justify them. So they create a theory when their Bible is no longer the active way to justify those atrocities, right? So why big tall Neander or why big tall Vikings? So first of all, Vikings are 700 to 900, right? So we're looking at like 1300 years ago, right? So and not all Vikings were light skinned. If you read the sagas, there are dark skinned Vikings in the sagas. Egil, Egilskullgrimsson is dark, and he's dark of skin. In fact, we know now that Scandinavia is settled by two groups of people. One is dark skin and light-eyed, and they're coming from the south. And one is light-skinned and dark-eyed, and they're coming from the steppes in the east, right? These two groups of people arrive in Scandinavia at roughly the same time. One of those groups of people becomes the Sami, and one of those groups of people become the Scandinavian groups of people. So at roughly 1,000 years ago, we're seeing that still roughly 10% of the Scandinavian population is dark of skin. How we get tall blonde Vikings is mythology, right? It's total mythology. And it is also the fact that as you're adapting into a region, you adapt into that region. So if we look at the dark skinned, light eyed people that came from the southern region of Western Eurasia at 7 to 10,000 years ago and move up into the Scandinavian area roughly 7 to 8,000 years ago, we see a group of people that is dark skinned and light eyed. And again, that group of people is actually the light skinned descendants now. The light skinned, dark eyed are the Sami, who are kind of darker skinned and still darker eyed, right? So the light skinned, blue eyed Scandinavians that we know of come from dark skinned, blue eyed. So we got banned over there for hate speech. I'm not sure what in that was hate speech. We'll see how long the submitted appeal goes through, or how long it takes for the appeal to go through. Let me go ahead and put up a little blurb so people know what's going on, and then I'll come back in. Apparently stating that, light skin is not the genetic advantage is a reason to get a live ban. I've submitted the appeal. We'll see if it comes back through. Keep an eye out. I'll be live again as soon as possible. I am currently over on YouTube. I have to put the captions in because I always have to put the captions in. So give me just a minute. I'm sorry. There's all sorts of people making comments on my videos right now too. That is all about how horrible we are. So we'll see how long this takes. There we go. So let's see if I get that back or not. We'll stay up for a while longer and see. Though, yeah, they did get me, and I mean, that shouldn't actually fucking stay. There's no reason. I mean, there was nothing. There was nothing I was saying or doing that would have in any way, shape, or form been hate speech, right? Um, So who the fuck knows? I never know. I've been on for like over 2 hours anyway, so it's not that bad for me to be off. But I do hope that they go ahead and the appeal comes through pretty quick, just so that we can get back on as soon as possible. I know that if you're on my YouTube, that you've been in my lives a few times already. So I do not know those two people that are over here on YouTube, what it is that you've participated in with the lives in before. And so I don't want to be giving just extra information that you've already had. Um, so if you have any questions, please let me know. Um, Talking about Homo erectus, though, and the way that Homo erectus is spreading across the planet. Yes, it is. It's Ogham, and it's Irish Gaelic. It's step up, translated or speak out. On my ankle is step up, translated into Irish Gaelic, and then written in Ogham so that it can. It's connection. It's prayer and it's medicine, right? For me, those are really important activities to try to ensure, future survivability of all of us, and so I try and do a lot of thought process within those. So uh, I have step up on the back of my ankle and speak out on my neck. There are also lyrics from a song done by Rising Appalachia called Step Up, Speak Out. And it goes, yeah, yeah, right. Like, why? There's a Rising Appalachia song, and it goes, "Step up, speak out, show up, get loud. Step up, speak out, show up, get loud." And when I was doing a lot of healing after I came to Portland, after Standing Rock, because I arrived in Portland almost directly from Standing Rock, and after I came to Portland after Standing Rock, and I was going through a whole lot. Thank you, Delilah. I appreciate that. Um, I was going through a lot of stuff and I was trying to heal. And so Rising Appalachia was one of those things that I listened to a lot in that attempt to heal, right? Awesome, Kim. Oh, that makes sense. Um, and so, yeah, okay. So we're back over there. I'm going to go ahead and set that up really quick as we're talking. But because of that, I actually, oh God, the weird effects that they have going on here. And they auto put my effects on now, and I'm like, I do not need those Mickey Mouse ears. Uh, so I actually sung that song like over and over and over again for probably a year straight. That and they have another song called Resilience, and it goes, I am resilient. I trust the movement. Um, Negate the negative, uplift the positive. And it's a really beautiful song. And so I just kind of used that. I'm pretty sure there are people targeting me on there. I mean, let's be real. You've got a lot of people that are. Why won't it let me? Hold on, I'm trying to make sure to get the screen in the back going on. There's a lot of people on here who are creationists, anti-evolutionists, anti-science people. And when you deal with anti-science people and you have science, it's not something that they want to deal with, right? And because they don't want to deal with this science, um, and they don't want anybody else to know the science, that's really that, and we've talked about before, that buying into the system, buying into what's going on, right? Yeah. And I think, that to me is the hardest part is I do believe that there are a lot of people in here who are just really trying to learn, just really want to, actually like understand new things. And so they're coming in to learn and understand new things, and people are being shitty and commenting and being crappy. And so it becomes very hard to learn new things. And then for me, it becomes this thing like I really want to be able to like shut down the comments. But at the same point, there's so many people in here who are learning from the comments. I learn from the comments, right? I learn from the comments as they're coming through. Hi, I'm just resetting. I'm talking to YouTube because YouTube did not get shut down like we did over here. And so I'm just trying to reset and send it out again and let everybody know that we are actually live again. And the access. Well, I can't do things on my phone with my nails like this, I have to say. Like it is driving me nuts. And I have like a little thing that but I think I left the little thing in the bedroom that is supposed to help me scroll through my little things. I can't find my little things, but my nails, they're gorgeous. They're gorgeous. Like, I'm really pleased with them. They're going to be really great for our thing this weekend. But like, fuck off. This is just too much. I think, okay, so I think this is where we were at. But I do think that a lot of it is the fact that we have so many people who are anti-science, and they, in their anti-science, are really against the idea of actually, like, I got banned. It was a live ban. Somebody reported me for hate speech because apparently telling white people that light skin is not an evolutionary advantage pisses them off. And, you have to always find a way to make sure that if you're white, that you're the victim in every situation. And so there was, I'm sure that that's what got the report, because that's usually what got the report, is you get the anti-evolutionists and anti-scientists who really can't handle that. And then of course, you get the racists who really can't handle the anti-racism in education. So, I'm pretty sure that that's where we're at. I'm just trying to make sure and send it out so those who are in here know that we are live again. If I send it to you twice and it's the second one, I apologize. It was not intentional. So what we were talking about is the fact that light skin is not the evolutionary advantage. The evolutionary advantage is, in fact, dark skin, right? That light skin will work in certain areas, and light skin is an adaptation for certain areas, but it is not the evolutionary advantage. The evolutionary advantage is absolutely dark skin. And that when we're looking at speciation and we're looking at us as an early species, we absolutely see that light skin comes much later, right? That light skin is something that is really coming. And I think at the time, actually, we were talking about the large blonde-haired Viking myth, right? And the fact that even within the sagas, we see that there are definitely several people who are darker within the sagas. There's roughly 10% of the Scandinavian population is still going to be darkest skin at that point of time. And when we were talking about, how do we get to a point of light skin and dark skin, right? Again, what we talked about, or what we were talking about, is the fact that we see that light skin comes roughly 900,000 years ago in the alleles. So it comes before us, but we don't see it in us initially. None of our DNA that we have from our earlier Homo sapien finds shows light skin alleles. In fact, we see that the first people that are making it into Eurasia are actually very darkest skin. The light eyes actually develop first. And we didn't really touch on the eye color in just a second ago. So let's go ahead and touch on that really quick. So eye color is an adaptation for light as well. So darker eyes are actually more advantageous in a high sun content area because of the fact that it's a concentration of melanin, and that concentration of melanin protects from the UV rays, protects from the sun. And so light eyes come later on, and they come later on when we start moving into regions that don't have a heavy sun content, right? So the light eyes they are better at seeing in the darker areas. So light eyes are an advantage for darker areas. So if your area is low sun content, there's not a lot of sun, you're going to see that the lighter eyes are actually going to allow more light in. There's not as much blocking of the light that you get with the darker eyes. And again, this is all melanin. This is all melanin, right? This is all having to do with melanin. We all have melanin. Your concentration of melanin depends on, well, actually, it doesn't even depend on your ancestors as much. They're realizing that your concentration of melanin actually has a lot of environmental factors. And that, we know there's famous cases of white, or what we would call white people, having what we would call black children. And without black ancestry, so this is something that does happen anyways. And so we know now that it has a lot more to do with environmental factors even than it does with biology, right? Well, not biology, with genetics, right? It has more to do with environmental factors than it does to do with genetics. And so the light eyes are starting first in Homo sapiens before the light skin starts. And the reason that the light eyes are starting first in Homo sapiens is because you need to be able to see in a low light environment first, right? You're not going to survive predation in a low light environment if you don't have lighter eyes. And so we see that the lighter eyes are developing first in Homo sapiens as they're moving across Western Eurasia. Now, you might tell me there are people along the northern part of the equator and the poles that have darker eyes. This is true. Yeah, albinoism is a totally different thing. People in higher points of the equator, so along like the poles, do have darker eyes a lot of the times. The reason for this is because when sun hits snow, it bounces back. This is also why we have the I can never pronounce this word right, so I'm going to pronounce it wrong, and I apologize up front. But the epithetic fold or epi something fold in the inner corner of the eye that we see in our areas that have um, a lot of snow. So we see these in Arctic spaces. So the Sami, um, the Inuit, Nupek, the people of Siberian steppes, the people of Northern Asia are going to have that fold on the inner part of the eye, and they're going to have dark eyes. And the reason that they're going to have dark eyes and that fold on the inner part of the eye is because sun hits snow, bounces back up. And so this blocks the sun from bouncing back up as much, and the darker eye prevents from that bounce back. Epicanthal, thank you. Epithelial is our skin, right? So epicanthal, thank you so much, Gabby. I got a live ban. The appeal obviously worked really quick, but it was a live ban. And it does have, but it's actually more for the snow. It is actually more because the light reflects back up. At least that is what I was taught scientifically. The Inuit and the Inupek are actually lighter of skin. So just like in Africa, you can get all ranges of skin color prior to colonization. In Turtle Island, you can get all ranges of skin color prior to colonization. You can get all ranges of skin color in both spaces prior to colonization, right? And really what it is the fact that it's, again, along equatorial regions. So you can get in Turtle Island and Abiyala, you can get people who are extremely dark of skin, right? That are from the equatorial regions, and so they're darker skin, or they're from a heavy sun content region, and so they're darker skin. And then you get people in the northern regions or in a less sun content region who have less sun, and so they have lighter skin, right? They're still getting that bounce back of sun, and they still have sun, right? But they're not getting as much of that direct sunlight, and so they're getting dark or lighter skin. Prior to colonization, there absolutely a lot of lighter skin among northern populations within Turtle Island. So blue, that word is a slur. So Inuit and Inupek are better words, right? Or Alaska Native, right? Native Alaskans, right? Those are better words than that. That is actually a slur. And some are. Some Inuit, I don't think that they knew. So, and they have been talking. So it's only for a second or two, but I don't think that they knew. Inupek and Inuit absolutely can be darker skin, but they can also be lighter skin. We see many examples of lighter skin Inupek and Inuit people when the colonizers arrive. Just like we see many examples of darker skinned people along the equatorial regions in Turtle Island when the colonizers arrived too. So all of these things, again, are adaptations for region. And again, as I was saying, light skin adaptation is not a genetic advantage. It is only advantageous in specific regions. It's not advantageous outside of those specific regions, whereas dark skin can be used in any region and is actually the evolutionary advantage. So when we're looking at the Nordic people, again, at 7,000 years ago, we start to see two groups, or I think that's the finalization. I think it starts at 8,000 years ago. We see two groups moving into the Scandinavian regions. And the two groups that we see moving into the Scandinavian regions, one is the Finno-Uriaic group that comes from the steppes. And they come in with light skin and dark eyes. And one is the European group that comes in and uses Indo-European languages and comes in from the southern part, and they are darkest skin and light of eyes because, again, light eyes is the first adaptation. Because you need to be able to see before you need to be able to get the extra vitamin D from the sun, because you can get vitamin D from plants. You can get vitamin D from the stomach contents of animals. And because of that, we see that light eyes is the first adaptation that we see coming across. Darker skin starts to become more of the population at roughly 5,000 years ago, is where you start to see it become not a majority of the population, but a little bit more evenly within the population. And then by about 3 to 4,000 years ago, they're starting to see that dark skin starts to become the majority of the population, or light skin starts to become the majority of the population in the Eurasian or the Northwest, not even Northwest, in the Eurasian area. And then at 2,000 years ago, you're going to start to see that roughly probably 80% of the population has lighter skin. And you still have roughly 20% of the population that has darker skin. And then by the time of the sagas, by the time of the Vikingers, we're seeing that still roughly 10% of the population in Scandinavia has dark skin. Within this, roughly 10% of the population in Scandinavia that has dark skin, we actually see these people mentioned several times in the sagas. Anything that's called swarthy in the sagas, anybody who is called the black in the sagas or the dark in the sagas, and sometimes we, as translators, have mistaken the word bleu for black, which is actually blue. Blue is actually a signifier of the dead in the saga. So blue has association with the saga, but when you see there are many signifiers of black within the saga, and many signifiers of having dark skins within this dark skin within the sagas. And so even within the Viking sagas, we see that dark skin actually is very not very prominent, but it is known and seen quite a bit, right? Because the mummies in Peru, the civilization in Peru predates the civilization in Egypt. Kemet is 5,000 years old, 6,000 years old. The first, the unification of Kemet is like 6,000 years old. And that's with King Scorpion, who actually existed. He's actually the first hieroglyphics that we have carved on a wall, a rock wall in a pass, is where we see our dynasty 00 is what we call it, and King Scorpion is the first king of dynasty 00. He's the first hieroglyphics we see. The cultures in Peru predate the cultures in Africa, and that's why the mummies, or not the cultures in Africa, predate the Egyptian culture, the Kemet culture in Africa. And because they predate the Egyptian or Kemet culture in Africa, the mummies there are older, right? So and it's just really the fact that, um, time, right? When civilizations were around and when civilizations rose and fell, right? Um, so yes, we do have large blonde-haired Vikings. And the question about the large was about skin, right? Because we were talking about the fact that skin tone affects your ability to retain or dissipate heat, right? So if you have more skin, you are able to dissipate heat better, not skin tone, but skin amount, right? If you have more skin, you're able to dissipate heat better. And if you have less skin, you are able to hold on to or retain your heat better, right? And because the dissipation of heat is really what we're looking at there, why we're looking at the taller Vikings. So speciating in a space, right, is different than adapting to a space, right? And so our species speciates in Africa, and our species speciates tall in Africa, right? Because again, we speciate in a very hot environment, and in speciating in that very hot environment, we have to speciate with more skin so that we can dissipate that heat easier, right? And so we speciate very tall and lean. Now, this does not mean everybody in Africa is tall and lean. There are people within Africa who are very short. There's all skin tones in Africa prior to colonization, all heights in Africa prior to colonization, right? Um, but not but when we speciate, and when we speciate much taller. And so when you get to the Vikings, what you're looking at is we speciate taller, right? So you're going to see that you're going to get taller people. Neanderthal speciates in that area, so Neanderthal speciates shorter, right? But we're just adapting to an area that we didn't speciate in. So we might get, a little bit shorter if we need to. Also, there's a lot more clothing by the time, than and there's clothing prior, but tailored clothing comes after, right? And so, having tall, blonde haired, blue eyed Vikings, again, those Vikings, if you're blue eyed, you're coming from the south part of Eurasia, and that's when you're moving in. It is the darker eyed people, the Sami people that are coming from the east. But you're coming in as a species that's already taller. So, you're not going to be shrinking as much, right? Also, most of the people are Germanic descent, and the Germanic peoples were always taller peoples, anyways. There is theory and thought process that this has to do with the food, right? So, you see that a lot of people who are eating a lot of breads and a lot of carbohydrates and not a lot of protein have a tendency to be shorter, right? So, when you're looking at this is something that's really kind of brought to light when we're looking at the Italians versus the Germanic peoples. So the Italian peoples versus the Germanic peoples. The Italian peoples are very carb heavy. They're very bread heavy, right? You might not get a whole lot of meat if you are a member of the Italian tribes, right? Whereas the Germanic people hunt heavy. They're not living in the big Roman cities and stuff like that. They're not on the dole, the bread dole. They're getting most of their nutrient from hunting. They're getting most of their nutrient from proteins and from meat. And because they're getting most of their nutrients from proteins and from meat, they're growing taller. This is one of the theories of the thought process of why the Germanic people are so much taller than the Italian people, right? So fried bread is addictive. Don't get me wrong. My daddy taught me how to make fried bread when I was young, and I make that shit every day of the week if I can, right? Like fried bread is addictive. Carbohydrates are huge, right? And we had carbohydrates here in Turtle Island. We just had different kinds of carbohydrates, right? So um, that is one of the thought processes on why the Germanic people are actually so much taller than the Italian people. Um, I would also like to point out that, like, so there is a lot of backwards migration from Turtle Island, and there's also the Icelandic people coming over, and there is mitochondrial DNA from Turtle Island in Iceland because there was at least one woman who came back to Iceland, or at least her children came back to Iceland. On average, most people in the nations in Turtle Island are actually taller. And personally, I think that this comes from that species, that ghost species when we were talking. Yes, blue. I'm saying that the allele for it is 900,000 years old and that it has been here for over 5,000 years, yet we don't see it become something that is even half of the population until 5,000 years ago. And I'm not sure what's not adding up in that. I'm not sure why that doesn't add up for you. Allele for light skin. So our skin colors is based on alleles, right? So we have like 7 different alleles for skin color. And those alleles, the combination of them determine what your skin tone is, right? How much melanin. And that's really what it is how much melanin is in your skin because we all have melanin. Um, but when we're looking at the alleles, the current data based on DNA is that the alleles that make light skin happen. No, it's 900,000 because it was in Neanderthals too. And Neanderthals, it was in Heidelbergensis and Neanderthals because they think that it came to both of us from Heidelbergensis. Because the alleles for light skin within us and the alleles for light skin within Neanderthal are 2 different alleles. And they think that it comes from Heidelbergensis because they think that we're both descended from Heidelbergensis. And the allele from light skin comes in with Heidelbergensis adaptation. Right. Oh, J2, I'm not sure about that one. Is that the one in southern Mexico? Um, there's only a few stone tools in that one, and that one's still pretty hotly debated. There's a couple other finds here that are older than that, actually. Um, the cave in southern Mexico has, I think it has a point and evidence of fire, if I remember correctly, from the cave in southern Mexico. In southern Mexico, in the same place, is also Heotloca, which is the the conservative dating is 50,000 to 60,000, or 50,000 to 80,000 years ago. The other dating is the white sands footprints are 27,000 years old. The other dating for Heotloca is 250,000 years ago. And then there's a third dating for Heotloca that's 800,000 years ago. And Heotloca is tools and paintings, art, tools and rock wall paintings, right? And it is, I'm going to go with the middle dating on it, which is what I've seen that works for me. And it is 250,000 years old. There's also the Cerruti Mastodon find in San Diego, California. And the Cerruti Mastodon find in San Diego, California is 130,000 years old. And that is tools among juvenile mastodon bones. And then I have another one here. Let me make sure I got the Calico site. And the Calico site was worked on by Leakey, who is like world famous paleoanthropologist and one of the top ones. And it is I think the Calico site is in Texas. Let me double check where the Calico site is. It's either in Texas or California, and I can't remember off the top of my head. So let me double check where the Calico site is. California. Okay. So the Calico site is in California, and the Calico site is 200,000 years old. So we have at least 3 sites here prior to 100,000 years old here in the Western Hemisphere, right? So there's a lot of evidence for what we call multi-regional speciation, but what we call multi-regional speciation is Neanderthal speciating in Europe and Denisovan speciating in Asia and Florensis speciating in the Isle of Flores in Indonesia. They all come from Homo erectus. So whatever site that we have here that predates Homo sapien, because those 3 sites that I just mentioned all predate Homo sapien here in Turtle Islands, those sites here that predate Homo sapiens is a Homo erectus coming out and making it to Turtle Island and speciating here like they did into Neanderthal and like they did into Denisovan and like they did into Florensis, right? So when we're looking at that, what we're looking at is speciation is a multi-regional thing. These are not us. We have them in us, right? So as we were mentioning earlier, there's like 7 ghost species that we have found both in the archaeological record and in ourselves. And there are roughly 7 other species that we lived alongside of. Some of those we intermix with, like Denisovan and Neanderthal, and we know that, right? There is a ghost species, which is a species that we find in our DNA, but not in the archaeological record here in Turtle Island indigenous people and Abiyalian indigenous people, which correlates with those 3 sites, right? So those 3 sites are most likely sites from a descendant of Homo erectus that speciates here in Turtle Island, right? And after they speciate here in Turtle Island, when Homo sapien gets here at 50,000 years ago, because that's the newest dating for Homo sapien in Turtle Island, when Homo sapien gets here at 50,000 years ago, they did what Homo sapien does everywhere else. They enveloped those people within their culture, probably taking on those people's culture, because that's what Homo sapien does prior to 10,000 years ago everywhere. So as they are immigrating to the Turtle Islands as Homo sapien at 50,000 years ago, and they meet up this species that's already there, they become a part of the culture of the species that's already there. And this is doubling down on the fact that that they're indigenous to the space. The Turtle Island indigenous people and the Abiyalian indigenous people are indigenous to this space. And it also shows that multi-regional theory and still supports the fact that we're all one species. We can't speciate in different areas and be one species. We have to speciate together to be one species. So This supports the idea that we do all speciate within Africa as our species, as Homo sapiens, and then we start moving across the globe as Homo sapiens, like Homo erectus did way before us. And as we're moving across the globe as Homo sapiens, we're coming in contact with all of these other species, and we're enveloping these other species within us, right? And as we're enveloping these other species within us, we're becoming a part of them, right? And so, there are many theories that are supported by this evidence, right? It's not just one theory that supports this evidence, or this evidence doesn't just support one theory, it supports many different. I have been going for like 2 hours though. And if you know me, you know that that's roughly my limit. So, the Vegas site in Chile. There's a, do you mean like Vega, like the conqueror Vega has a site named after him in Chile? Or do you mean like there's a site in Vegas? We did mix with them. Not only did we mix with them, but we became a part of their culture and they became a part of our culture, which is why we are indigenous to the space, right? Because we have the blood of the people who were created here within the space, and because we've been here 50,000 years. And we've been here longer than people were in Europe, right? It's because we've been here longer than people were in Europe, right? I don't think that we can really state who the oldest surviving indigenous people are. I do know that we have indigenous populations around the world, and each of them is indigenous to that space. How you would relate what the oldest surviving indigenous population is how you would look at which space has people in the longest. So outside of Africa, the oldest surviving continued indigenous culture is Australia, and that's 70,000 years. Um, Absolutely. Aborigines is a slur. Don't use the INES. Use Aboriginal instead, because Aborigine is actually a slur. Um, just so that you're aware. Pyramids were here first. This picture is Homo erectus. Most people alive today don't look like Homo erectus. The melanated people, so the indigenous people of Turtle Island and Abya are 50,000 years here. That would not be the oldest. I mean, that's still huge, right? But the oldest is DNA shows that the oldest indigenous population still currently outside of Africa is the indigenous population of Australia, and they are 70,000 years old, right? Yes. I'm extremely mixed. I'm indigenous to Turtle Island, yet I am also extremely mixed. I have a grandmother who was brought here during the transatlantic slave trade, and grandmothers from all over the globe. And so I was saying we at that point because Turtle Island Indigenous, because we are all indigenous to Turtle Island. Um, I also use we as a pronoun because she, he, and we are my pronouns. It is about, well, first of all, I'm two spirit, which means that I actually embody two different spirits within me. And so that's a part of the we. And then the other part of the we is the fact that for me, community is paramount. Sapiens never quashed other species of hominin. Other species of human is probably what you're thinking of. We never squashed other species of human. We mixed with other species of human and became a part of other species of human. John Doe, Australian Indigenous people would tell you to not use INES. The Aboriginal is not a slur, but Aborigine is a slur. So Turtle Island Indigenous people are all indigenous to Turtle Island, Blue. That's what that was. When I said we are all indigenous, I said because I'm Turtle Island indigenous and we are all indigenous. 759. Are you talking about Brazil? So people in Abiyala and Turtle Island, Homo sapiens in Abiyala and Turtle Island are 50,000 years old. There is evidence that actually the boat crossing here, instead of a northern boat crossing across the Kelp Highway, was a southern boat crossing that went through Australia and the islands of the Philippines. There is evidence of Australian indigenous DNA here in Turtle Islands that supports that southern boat route through the islands of the South Pacific. The islands of the South Pacific sit on a ring of fire, and so the volcanic ring, they call it the Ring of Fire. And so the islands come and go a lot. They just found like a new continent down there, right? It's actually an old continent that they rediscovered, right? Things like that. So when we're looking at those things that we're talking about, or when we talk about those things, what is important to understand is because those islands come and go, they're islands that we'll never find because they've disappeared, right? And that is, and it is only from a couple of different groups. There are other people who call it Turtle Island, and that's not the way their creation story works, right? But okay, yeah, no, 759, that makes total sense. And so what I'm saying is that, or with that, yes, there is absolutely Australian DNA found in Abiyala, South America. And what it is because that southern boat route, because the newest understanding through DNA is that we pick up the Denisovan DNA and then we're going through the islands of the South Pacific through Australia and then into the islands of the South Pacific across to Abiyala first is the current understanding of what's going on in that migration route here. Um, and like we did everywhere else, every time we meet other people that, are remotely human, we have sex with them because we like to fuck everything. We're really big on having sex with everything we come across. All of us are. And so it's not that we actually like eradicated them. Somebody made that comment. But it is absolutely this intermesh, this mixing, this becoming a part of, right? We really, anything that you see that doesn't look, we like unusual. We like strange, right? So we absolutely see that every time we come across another of what we call a species currently, we just mix with them, right? We just intermix with them. And they did. They all became part of us. That's why we can find at least five other species that we haven't found in the fossil record within our own DNA, and two species that we have found in the fossil record within our own DNA, right? Um, Denisovan is the species is Homo denisovan, and they were first found in the Denisova cave in Russia. We name our species of other humans after where we find them. um, Outside of like, so homo habilis means handyman. Homo means man. Homo means human, right? In Latin, it means same in Greek, but in Latin, which is where all scientific terms get stolen or get taken from, homo means human. So anything with the genus homo is a human. When we look at homo habilis, we named homo habilis because we thought that they're who's created this first stone tools, and so we call them handyman. When we named Homo erectus, they're the first upright man that we found. And so we named them Homo erectus, which means upright man. When we are naming the other humans that we came in contact with, or the other humans that lived at the same point of time of us, yes, Dirk, we are looking at naming based on where we found. So we have Homo neanderthal because we found them in Neander Valley. We have, and Neanderthal means Neander Valley, tall as valley. So we have Homo neanderthal because we found them in Homo neanderthal, or we found them in Neander Valley. And then we have Homo florensis because we found them in the Isle of Flores in Indonesia. We have Homo naledi because naledi means star, and they come from the rising star caves in South Africa. We have Homo denisovan because Homo denisovan was found in Denisova cave in Russia. We have Homo luzonensis because we found them in the Luzon island of the Philippines. And Homo longi is named after the Long caves in China, long meaning dragon. So Homo longi, and it would be pronounced longi. Homo longi is the dragon man, right? And we name them after where we find them. Any other species of human that we kind of lived alongside of, we named after where we found them. Elon Musk came from the narcissistic God Kings and the idea of exploiting everybody, and an apartheid South Africa is where Elon Musk came from, because, and we could absolutely send him back any day of the week, right? He can take his dick-shaped rocket to space and stay there. There are plenty of people out there who we might call white who are actually indigenous. The Sami, we would call them white. They're indigenous. The Actually, the Ainu people of Japan are the indigenous people of Japan, and they look more European than most Japanese, right? But they're indigenous, and their eyes are slightly rounder. They have blue eyes and they have lighter skin, and they're indigenous to Japan, right? There are definitely indigenous groups around the world that are lighter skin. We also see like the Celts are light of skin and they're indigenous people, right? So Ireland is an indigenous group, and we see that the Cymry, which is Welsh, and the Kenwick, which is Cornish, are fighting for recognition as indigenous groups as well, right? So we see that there are absolutely lighter groups out there that are indigenous. The Ukrainians are an indigenous group. The Palestinians are an indigenous group, right? We have indigenous groups around the world, right? Um, that's awesome. I call myself gold too, because I'm gold. Like I turn gold. But yeah, so there are indigenous groups around the world who we would call white, right? Um, Again, like the Sami and the Scandinavians, they move into the area at the same time, and the Sami move in as a light-skinned, dark-eyed group, and the Scandinavians moved in as a dark-skinned, light-eyed group, right? And yet, the Sami are still the indigenous people. Yeah, so look up, it's AINU, Blue. It's AINU, the Ainu people, and they are lighter of skin and rounder of eye, actually. Like they don't look Asian, or what we would equate with being Asian, right? And you're right, white isn't real, it's a social construct. This is all, like, anything that has to do with race has to do with colonial construct. Race doesn't exist. They've proven that race doesn't exist, right? Ed, the first Homo genus walks out of Africa to Eurasia at 1.9 million years ago. The oldest tooth that we have of a human is found in Georgia. It's a Homo erectus tooth, and it's 1.9 million years ago. So we see that the first leaving of what we would consider the continent of Africa is at 1.9 million years ago, right? We're all one species. So species doesn't fit into it unless we're talking about different actual species. There were not people before the Celts in specific areas. The Celts would be a descendant group of the Gravachians in the lower part of Western Eurasia. And the Celts within Britain and within Ireland are going to be descendant groups from the first groups that were there. So the direct descendant of Cheddar Man is less than a mile from where he was at. Like, they found Cheddar Man, his body, less than a mile from the direct descendant, 300 generation direct descendant of Cheddar Man is less than a mile away. Now, Cheddar Man has no alleles for light skin. He has alleles for blue eyes. He is a dark-skinned, light-eyed individual. His descendant is light, right? So yes, because what I am saying is that because so we have three populations of bell beakers. three populations of bell beakers are genetically different, but the population, the culture within the population is the same. One of those populations is in northwestern Eurasia. One of the populations is in southwestern Eurasia, and one of those populations is in the Isle of Britain, on the island of Britain, right? So we have three populations of you too, Blue. Have a great one. We have three populations of bell beaker people, right? The genetic descendants of those bell beaker people are in the area that the bell beakers were in. So, like the genetic descendants of the bell beakers in northwestern Eurasia are still in that area. The genetic descendants of the bell beaker people in southwestern Eurasia are still in that area. The genetic descendants of the bell beaker people within Britain are still in that area, right? And so Black Panther, Pantherette, that's cute. The INES is considered a slur by the people of that space. So they prefer Aboriginal, okay, just so you're aware. And so our understanding with that, there's not really a lot of admixture. So there is a ghost species within Indigenous Australians. There's also a site in Australia that's 120,000 years old, which would be a descendant species of Homo erectus, which correlates with that ghost species within Indigenous Australians. Indigenous Australians have been in Australia for 70,000 years. There is not a lot of admixture there, right? There's not a lot of admixture until later on. Um, there is some of their admixture in other groups as other groups are passing through that area, but there's not a lot of admixture there. Yeah, and I'm not begging on you. I'm only making you aware. Like I get made aware constantly that things are slurs, and I try and adjust my conversation as I make, because I live in the United States. Something might be a slur here that's not a slur elsewhere, and something might be a slur elsewhere that's not a slur here. And so if somebody says, "Hey, I'd rather you didn't call my people that," I go, "Oh, okay. What would you prefer so that I can make sure I'm doing it correctly?" And then I just try and pass on that information. But it's no harm, no foul, because most of us don't know, right? Most of us don't know. And so I just try and make sure that people know as I know and as I see it, just so that we can all, do better, right? I did not say that, Drendy. It is far-fetched. So that's that whole ethos and ethnocentrism, right? Um, and so at 50,000 years ago, when people get to the Turtle Islands, they've already gone through and lived in Eurasia, and they've gotten Denisovan DNA, and they have gone through the islands of the South Pacific and Australia and got some Australian DNA. And they've got some DNA from the islands of the South Pacific itself. And then they get to Turtle Island and they pick up more DNA from another species that's already here. And so by the time Europeans arrive to South America or Abiyala, which is where they first arrived, we see that they're meeting up with a copper-hued, some very darker of skin, yes, but a copper-hued group that have coarse, straight hair. So people in America today or in the United States today that we would describe as black, right? And I use this because again, race is a colonial construct. It doesn't actually exist. We do have different groups that we describe as different terminology, right? So groups that we would describe as being phenotypically black within the United States today are not the original people of the United States or of the Americas. They are people whose ancestors were brought over here in the transatlantic slave trade. They are victims or survivors of colonialism, just like the Native Americans are survivors of colonialism, and indigenous people in the Western Hemisphere are survivors of colonialism. They are survivors of a colonialism from a different space. Not that the colonization was happening in that space, but not of the colonization in that space, but of the transport of them to this space, right? So, absolutely jazzy. And that is true. But phenotypically, if somebody is what we would call phenotypically black, the likelihood is that they are descendants from people from the transatlantic slave trade. Now, that does not negate the fact that there are Afro-American or Afro-Indigenous people. Like there are people that are part a descendant from Africa and part descendant from Turtle Island indigenous people or from Abayalian indigenous people, right? That absolutely happens, right? Um, and it does not negate the fact that there are many groups of people who are Turtle Island indigenous who were called Black by the colonizers, right? Yet they were not phenotypically what we consider to be Black today. And I'm just going by what I'm trying to talk to is the fact that there are groups called ethnocentric that are trying to negate and erase Turtle Island indigenous people and say that they are the original people of Turtle Island, right? And so that's just untrue, right? The original people of Turtle Island are who we understand to be Turtle Island indigenous people. Uh, Pretty much anybody from south of the Mexican US border. Um, Anybody who is, a descendant from one of the nations that was originally here within Turtle Island or the nations that was originally in Abayala. Some Melanesians are what we would call phenotypically Black. Not all Melanesians are what we would call phenotypically Black, though, right? That website right up there, widdaord.com, all of my sources, this is my personal website that I use to compile bibliographies because TikTok doesn't let me post websites, right? So on my website, there is compiled sources for all of this information, right? Thank you, thank you. I know that what I'm saying is the truth today, right? Like I've got like scientific evidence that backs this up. I'm a scientist. I'm an anthropologist. This is kind of what I do. I've done a lot of research on it. I've got plenty of articles and sources on it. I'm also well aware, which I really, really, really talk about a lot in here, that facts change, right? Today's facts won't be tomorrow's facts, right? 10 years ago, Turtle Island indigenous people had only been here for 12,000 years. Now we know they've been here for 50. Facts change all the time, right? So as facts change, I try to make sure that I change my facts, right? I try and make sure as I find the change of facts that I let people know of that change of facts, right? That's also why if you think that I'm wrong on something and you have a source so that I can, go and look and see where I'm wrong, I'm down. Like I am learning new information every day, just like all of us are learning new information every day, and we should be, right? So I'm definitely like always looking for new information and definitely aware that just because it's a fact today doesn't mean it's a fact tomorrow, right? The Olmec stoneheads actually look like phenotypically Turtle Island indigenous people. One second, I'll actually show you this. It's going to take me a minute and I'm probably going to pause because of the fact that I've got to scroll through a bunch of different pictures to get to it. So give me just a second and I'll show you. If you're watching on YouTube or if you can even hear me in TikTok, I know this takes a long minute, so just a second and I apologize. Get myself out of the way. This is a really good picture. As you can see, here's some Olmec heads next to Turtle Island indigenous people. So as you can see with this, Turtle Island indigenous people are absolutely Turtle Island indigenous people. And the Olmec heads are actually very, it won't let me put that anywhere else. Let me put it there. Fuck, got rid of it. Sorry about that. I'll pop it back up. So this is the Olmec heads. The Olmec heads, if I remember correctly, are pre-Mayan. Their descendants were the Mayan. And so as you can see, these are phenotypically Turtle Island indigenous people next to the Olmec heads. As you can see, the Olmec heads are absolutely phenotypically Turtle Island indigenous. I was asked, and I always make sure, especially when I'm dealing with ethnocentrism, that we actually take a look at this, right? That we actually look at the truth behind it, and we have DNA that backs us up, right? We have no Turtle Island is the one of the indigenous terms for North America, obviously translated into English, right? Awesome. Yeah, absolutely, Avente. Well, and what I dislike about it is why are we giving the colonizers a fucking out? Like anytime we're like, well, black people didn't come from Africa, black people were already here. What we're saying is that the transatlantic slave trade didn't happen. So you're giving the colonizers an out. Like you're giving them a free pass on horror, right? I believe that, Green Baron. That makes total sense. So that's a hard one for me. As a grandchild of somebody who came over during the transatlantic slave trade, who's somebody who escaped slavery, somebody who I have pictures of her child, as a grandchild of somebody who went through the transatlantic slave trade, it's horrific to me to erase my grandmother's trauma and erase my other grandmother's trauma. It's like, how many grandmother's traumas are you going to erase in this, right? It's not I don't know what you think is wrong about this, right? So, if we're looking at the DNA, right? The DNA shows this. So, DNA of Turtle Island indigenous people is unique. And what is unique about DNA of Turtle Island indigenous people is they have a ghost species in their DNA, right? And the other thing that is unique about Turtle Island indigenous people is they have Denisovan DNA, and there's only a few populations on this planet that have Denisovan DNA. And this is all in the in pre-colonized finds. So this is all DNA from finds like 15,000 years ago. 15,000 years ago, Turtle Island indigenous DNA shows that they're so first of all, the mitochondrial and the Y DNA is different, right? The mitochondrial DNA lines. There's X1 here and there's C1 here. You don't find those anywhere else. And those are both mitochondrial. I can't remember all the Y ones. The Denisovan DNA presence, you don't find Denisovan DNA in anybody in Africa. You don't find anybody in Western Eurasia or Northwestern or Northeastern Eurasia. The only places that you find Denisovan DNA are in Southeast Eurasia, the islands of the South Pacific, Australia, Aviala, and Turtle Island. So Denisovan DNA shows this. And having the unique ghost DNA here in the Turtle Islands also shows this, right? Right. So when we're looking at that, it's important to look at the actual evidence and not just your feelings on it. And we're looking at the actual evidence and not just your feelings on it, right? I am an archaeologist and an anthropologist. So it's important that we look at the actual evidence, right? That we're not just looking at our feelings. Now, I understand the feeling of knowing that, like, I spent my whole life not knowing where my grandmother came from. I knew that she had, come over in the Southern Passage, and I knew that she was African, and I knew that she had escaped slavery pregnant with her master's child. Those are the things that I knew about my grandmother until I went and did my own research on my grandmother. And I did my DNA in 2020 because I was trying to find my biological father. And when I did my DNA in 2020, I was able to find out where my grandmother came from, because when you do your DNA and you have African ancestry, they'll tell you what part of Africa your DNA comes from. Mine is Sudanese. So I know that my African ancestress, my grandmother, comes from Sudan, right? So when we're looking at these things, we have to look at the actual evidence, right? We have to look at the actual evidence. And the actual evidence shows that the transatlantic slave trade happened, that Europeans went to Africa and stole people, disconnected people from their home, disconnected people from their people, disconnected people from their heritage, right? And that they brought people over and they disconnected people and continue to disconnect people and continue to disconnect people, right? This is major trauma. Major, major, major fucking trauma that if we ignore doesn't heal. A. B. If we ignore, we give a pass, right? We give a pass to the colonizers if we ignore the trauma that they inflicted, right? So if we're saying that the people today that are um, the descendants of the Africans who were stolen in the slave trade, right? If we say that they're instead Turtle Island Indigenous people and they were not stolen from Africa, and then Turtle Island Indigenous people don't actually exist, all you're doing is making it easier for the colonizers. Slavery is global pre-chattel slavery. Everybody had slavery. Europeans had slavery. Turtle Islanders had slavery. Africa had slavery. Everywhere has slavery, pre-chattel slavery. Pre-chattel slavery and chattel slavery are two extremely different things. And pre-chattel slavery is legal in the US today. The 13th Amendment makes pre-chattel slavery legal in the US today. So when people within Africa are selling their own people as slaves, they are not selling chattel slaves. They're selling indentured servants. And this is a different thing. This is a contract for a period of time. And so in selling an indentured servant's contract, you don't realize that you're selling them into Pangea's 275 million years ago. Everything having to do with humanity is post Pangea, just so you're fucking aware. Pangea predates us by 2 point. Even if you go with the oldest upright hominin, which is 7 million years ago, Pangea broke up 269 million years before the oldest upright hominin. So take your Pangea out here. When we're looking at African kings selling their indentured servants, they didn't realize that they were selling their indentured servants into chattel slavery, which is an entirely different thing. Okay. So, yes, you're right. Everybody had slavery. You're right. Nobody's perfect. Everybody existed within the thought processes of the day. You're right. How does that make you dehumanizing somebody okay? They weren't dehumanizing somebody. They weren't looking at something that they considered to be just another beast on the farm or animal on the farm, which is such a horrific thing to say. So I really hate fucking, but they're not looking at that. What they're looking at is another human being who owns a contract of time. You taking that and turning it into something nasty and horrific and horrid is your shit, not theirs. Right? Yeah, prisoners of war. So pre-chattel slavery, you can either enter into it through a contract. So, like the ancient Romans, they would enter into contract of slavery to pay off a debt. Sometimes, if somebody was stolen in a raid, they would become slaves for a while, and their children were enslaved, and they could work their way out of slavery, right? Um, so those are two different ways that you can enter into slavery, pre-chattel slavery, right? Nobody was really born into slavery, pre-chattel slavery, except for maybe some of the Roman thought processes, because some of the Roman processes did, like their Celtic people. Sometimes their children would be born into slavery and they would be a slave, but most of the time, I mean, you could buy your way out of slavery within the Roman contract, right? So, um, pre-chattel slavery is not, it's not a lifelong contract. It's not a, and you get a choice in it sometimes. Like there's a choice, because when it's a contract, you get to enter into that contract as a choice. And pre-chattel slavery doesn't turn somebody into less than human, whereas chattel slavery turns somebody into less than human in the eyes of the law, right? So my hair is actually pretty long. Do you not like the fact that it's put up? I don't care. If my lipstick and my hair makes you scroll on, it just means that you're not ready to hear, and that's okay. Scroll on. You didn't need to comment. The trolls are out. We're at 300 people in this chat, and that's why the trolls are out, right? The trolls are really out today. Black Vikings exist. So I am at over 2 hours, over 3 hours now. So I am going to go ahead and take off, right? Well, thank you, Viola. I am going to go ahead and take off. I did go ahead and stop it for a couple minutes just because it was getting overwhelming, probably for everybody. Excuse me. Before I go, though, I want to touch on something that I try and touch on every time in here. Biologically, we are nurturing and communal as a species. What do I mean by this? So biologically, as a species, we have what we call mandatory midwifery. Mandatory midwifery means that we have to have somebody assist us in our giving birth. And the reason that we have to have somebody assist us in our giving birth is because the way that the baby's head and shoulders are shaped, the way that our pelvic outlet is shaped, and the way the baby's facing as it starts to come out. So as the baby starts to come out of a human, Homo sapiens specifically, okay, the nose is faced to the back, and our pelvic outlet is like this, and the baby's head is like this. The nose is facing that way, so the baby's head is like this. So we turn them a quarter turn to get their head through the pelvic outlet, and then we have to turn them another quarter turn to get their shoulders out of the pelvic outlet. Now, all the other species of primates they have a very big, round pelvic passage, right? And birth canal, right? And their babies are generally small, so they don't have to be maneuvered through the birth canal. The only other species that we've ever had with mandatory midwifery is Neanderthals. We're the only other species other than Neanderthal that has mandatory midwifery. Mandatory midwifery means that we must have somebody help us birth our children, which means that we must have community to give birth. Okay. The other thing is that we are the only species on this planet with 5 life stages from neonate to adult. Those 5 life stages have to do with our brain development. We have a brain that needs to develop and develop and develop. Is what makes us as intelligent as we are, and it's what gives us kind of mutability within our brain and our ability to understand so many different concepts, right? So those 5 life stages from neonate to adult currently is 25 years, right? To nurture a child from neonate to adult takes 25 years. To nurture a child means community. One must have community to nurture a child, and a child must have nurture to make it to adulthood. We've all heard of the studies that they did in the 50s and the 60s where they put like all of the orphan children, they put in 2 different rooms, and one they nurtured and one they didn't, and we call it failure to thrive. So we must have nurture to get from neonate to adult. This means that you cannot pump, dump, and walk away and propagate our species. Just because you've implanted a child in a woman does not mean our species is propagating. If you do not make sure that that child grows from neonate to adult, from newborn to adult, then you're not propagating the species, right? So biologically, we are nurturing because we must nurture a child from neonate to adult over a 25-year period. And we are communal because we must have community to give birth to that child and to nurture that child. Even today, you have to have a community to nurture a child. Single parents still have to have a community to nurture a child, right? Even as a single mother, I had to have somebody who babysat my child while I went to work. I'd have somebody who employed me. I had to have somebody who was picking the vegetables and killing the animals that I could go to the grocery store and buy, right? So that's at least 3 members of a community, right? And that's not even counting all the chains of all of those things, right? So even today, in today's society, we must have community to nurture a child from neonate to adult. In a time when nurturing a child from neonate to adult means making sure the child doesn't kill itself, making sure the child doesn't get eaten by predators, making sure the child doesn't fall in the fire, and you've got to go out and hunt, and you've got to go out and make sure all the other things are happening, you need about 30 people to nurture a child from neonate to adult, okay? The only other species on the planet that has, extended life stages, bonobos have 8 years from neonate to adult, and elephants have 5 years from neonate to adult. Those are the longest of any other species. We are 25 years. Okay. So we are nurturing and communal biologically as a species. The rise of violence starts 10,000 years ago. we document this. This is all throughout archaeology, and we can understand and see this, that prior to 10,000 years ago, we have 2% of the 2,000 skeletal remains that we have as individuals prior to 20 or 10,000 years ago. Of 2%, there's 2% of things that could possibly be attributed to violence. Now, that doesn't mean that they're violence. What it means is that they could be attributed to violence. If a rock falls on your head from the top of a cave, I can't tell if the cave fell on you or somebody came up behind you and hit you with a rock. It could be one or the other. Neither one of these are, I can't tell from the wound whether or not it was a human hand wielding it or it wasn't, something happened accidentally, right? At 10,000 years ago, we start to see definitive violence in the archaeological record. And the numbers of things that could even be attributed to violence, along with the definitive violence, rises from 2% to 18%. This is 10,000 years ago. This is when we start having cities. This is where we start having monocrop agriculture. And this is where we start believing that we can own the land. But the land is not a living, breathing entity on its own, and therefore we can own it. And this is also where we start to see the rise of narcissistic God kings, people who are exploiting the holy fuck out of you so that they can maintain control over you. People that are telling you it is your next door neighbor that is the problem, not them, so that they can maintain control over you. So at this time frame, and we see this huge rise, this huge uptick in violence, we're the only species left on the planet. All of our interactions with any other species on this planet, we like to fuck everything that looks fun, right? If you even closely resemble a human being, we're like, hey, baby, come back with me. So we see that there's a lot of intermixing with every other species on the planet that we come in contact with. We are not sitting here being violent with anybody else prior to 10,000 years ago. Instead, we're integrating with them. We're becoming a part of them. They augment our community so our children are able to grow better, right? If I have 30 people, my child is safer. If I have 10 people, my child is not. I don't care where you came from as long as you're helping make my child safer, right? So we're not looking at other peoples at this time frame as being wrong. We're just looking at them as a new partner, somebody to learn from, somebody to be a part of, right? So we live in a society today that tells you to be nurturing and communal is wrong, that tells you to take care of your neighbor is wrong, that tells you that it's okay that Israel is committing an apartheid, that tells you that it is okay for Russia to bomb Ukraine, that tells you that you should not care about your neighbor. Instead, you should care about yourself, and only propagating yourself, right? We live in an extremely exploitative society. We live in a society where people are told to go against human nature, not only in being communal and nurturing, but men are told that they can't talk about their fucking feelings or they're not a man. So most of them are unaliving themselves because they're so fucking lost because they can't even express themselves, right? You are living in a society that is sick. This is late stage capitalism, and it is ill. And when you're living in a society that tells you to go against everything that is the biological drive of you as a human being, your reactions to it are going to be depression and anxiety. Okay. So you're a nurturing and communal human living in a society that tells you nurturing and communal is problematic, right? So you're unable to, you're not in a healthy space. So being depressed and being anxious is a very natural response to a sick society. And there are many of us who are dealing with this. Those of us who are dealing with this, we're seeing the truth. We're seeing what's going on, and we're seeing that this is unhealthy. Therefore, we're necessary to make the changes necessary to stop our mass extinction, because we're trying to kill ourselves off right now, right? So it's very important that, first of all, we recognize our own worth as humans. You are worthy just by sitting here. You are worthy just by breathing. You contribute to the continuation of the entire species as a whole just by being alive. Your right to life means you are worthy of being alive, okay? So you are worthy and you are necessary. And when you feel depressed and you feel anxious because the society around you is so sick and so twisted and so torn that it tells you that the things that are natural to humanity are antithetical or against humanity, we find people who are dealing with this deep rooted level of depression, right? I just want you to know today that you're required to be here, as in, we need you, as in, you're not the problem, you're part of the solution. If you can see the world around you for what is really going on, then you are not part of the problem, you are part of the solution. And you are necessary to make the changes that we need within society so that we can be healthy again. How do we get there? Land back globally. Returning governance and tending to indigenous peoples across the globe ensures the ability to survive on this planet, right? Ensures the return of a stable environment, ensures that people are being fed because currently we're not feeding people, and ensures that that nurture and community becomes an active part of society again. It gets rid of the exploitation that we are all fucking dealing with, right? So there are answers, and you are a part of that answer, right? And you are necessary. You are worthy just by being here. And your depression and your anxiety, your pain in the society that you live in today is a healthy response to an unhealthy society. I will go ahead and turn them back on for just 5 or 10 or just a couple of minutes as I'm leaving, just so anybody can say anything they want to as I'm leaving. As I'm doing that, I want to once again remind you that biologically we are nurturing and we are communal. You living in a society that is not nurturing and communal is why you are hurting. Why you are hurting. You are worthy. You have a need and a necessity to be here to help our species continue, to help us stay safe. And it is those who can look at the trauma and the pain that is going on and ignore it that are the problem. They're a part of that narcissistic God King level that is really trying to get you to hate anything but them, really trying to get you to think that it is your next door neighbor. They've been othering for 10,000 years. They started with the barbarians in the hills, then they went to the cities. That city isn't as advanced as ours. And then they went to gender, women are weaker. And then they went to religion. That religion is sinful. And then they started in on what they deemed to be race, which is again a colonial construct. And they utilized that to justify their atrocities to other people. And currently, our othering is based on immigration and houselessness, right? And so we are constantly looking at somebody else on our level as being the enemy instead of realizing it is the people who are trying to kill us, who do not care about us, and who are trying to exploit us for every last bit of us that is actually the people that we need to get rid of in there. Who are they? The narcissistic God Kings. We call them the 1%, the government. They are the people out there who believe that they're alphas and the people out there who believe it is their job to rule other people, right? That they need to be in control of other people and that think that you are just here to be exploited, right? That your only purpose is to be exploited. Merido, we are number one in maternal mortality rates in the first world, and we are number one in incarcerations. Those are the only two things that the United States is number one as. Just stating. Yeah, I know my history more than you do, just like I know my anthropology more than you do, right? And we've never saved anything. And as a war veteran who was in Iraq, we've never saved anything. Just saying. Anyways, have a beautiful, beautiful day, everybody. Remember that you are worthy just by existing, that we are nurturing communal. And if you're feeling depression in a world that is sick and harmful around you, then it is because you are healthy in an unhealthy world. And this is why I've turned it to survive to come. I hate having to put it on subscribers because I'm like, I don't want you to have to pay me to talk. Like, I don't want you to have to pay me, right? That just is icky to me. So I hate having to do it, but like, oh my God, sometimes it just gets fucked in here. So have a great day. Have a good time. And remember your worth, please. You're worthy and you are loved. I love you just for existing. I love you just for being here. I love you just for being a part of the solution, right? And you are necessary, right? You are necessary. Have a great one, everybody. And take care. And ignore the fucking trolls. We always need to ignore the trolls. I'm horrible at it, aren't I? Have a great day, guys. See you soon. I'll be back in probably Sunday. Probably Sunday. Bye. Bye, YouTube. I see you over there.